Most of you aren't subscribed. Make sure to subscribe, as it helps out the channel. Without further ado, our story starts with our group of heroes heading to the royal capital, all wondering what types of celebrations are happening in town. The hero wonders what types of jobs they'll have in the future, especially because the Demon King is now defeated, prompting the priest to wonder if he can find a job where he can drink. The hero turns to the elf, Frieren, asking Frieren how she'll spend her life, especially since elven lives are very long. As the heroes' party march through town, they are praised and celebrated, only to stand before the king, who acknowledges their party to house Himmel the hero, Eisen the warrior, Heider the priest, and Frieren the mage. Thanking the heroes for slaying the Demon King, we cut to that night where the town is celebrating their newfound peace, cutting to Himmel, who tells everyone that there will be statues of them erected. As Frieren mocks the town for only giving them 10 copper coins when they first started their adventure, Heider states that everything is now behind them, and instead, they should celebrate. As the gang gaze off into the night sky, they all acknowledge that it's been 10 years since they started adventuring, reminiscing on their first day, where Himmel and Eisen were almost executed for bad-mouthing the king. They also remember times when Heider would get so drunk during their adventures and Frieren would constantly fall for the most basic of traps, all erupting into laughter for only remembering bad memories. Taking a breath, Himmel thanks everyone for the 10 years they spent together, but Frieren wonders what's so amazing about 10 years, reminded that 10 years by human standards is a long time. Just then, they all turn to face the night sky, spotting the Era meteor shower that only occurs once every 50 years. As the gang bicker about not getting to see the full beauty of the meteor shower from the city, Frieren utters that she'll take them to a better location next time they see it, making Himmel chuckle, grateful for the memories. The next morning, the party bid goodbye to Frieren, who plans on exploring the central lands to collect and learn more spells. As Frieren leaves, the others wonder how old Frieren truly is, cutting to several years later when Frieren has explored different locations, learned many new things, and has achieved many new goals. When Frieren visits a shopkeeper asking for a shadow dragon's horn, the shopkeeper states that shadow dragons haven't been alive for around 20 to 30 years, disappointing as Frieren needs a shadow dragon horn for her experiments. Frieren remembers that Himmel collected a shadow dragon horn in the Demon King castle, reasoning that she'll visit to watch the meteor shower with everyone whilst also collecting the shadow dragon horn. As Frieren walks through the capital, she's amazed to see everything has changed over the years, hearing Himmel's voice. But as she turns around, Frieren realizes that Himmel has grown quite old. Himmel states that it's been 50 years, both sitting down, only for Frieren to ask about the dragon horn. Remembering the memories from collecting the horn, Himmel happily gives Frieren the horn, telling Frieren that although she doesn't treasure the dragon's horn as much, Himmel himself never forgot the time spent collecting the horn. As Frieren heads outside to deliver the horn, she wonders what's the big deal about a lousy dragon's horn, only to head inside, asking Himmel to head out for the meteor shower. As they leave town, Frieren greets Eisen and Heider, who are amazed to see Frieren hasn't aged one bit, but Frieren is still against Heider patting her head. Frieren praises Eisen for seeming the same since they last met, something they all know is due to Eisen's dwarf heritage. As they begin to head off, Frieren tells them that the spot she picked out takes a week to travel to, but seeing as this is like the old days, they all gladly follow Frieren. As the gang tells stories over campfire and battle monsters like the old days, they all eventually make it to a lake, where Himmel thanks Frieren for their final adventure together, completely captivated by their final meteor shower together. With some more time passing, Himmel's finally passes, prompting Frieren and the others to attend Himmel's funeral, but Frieren is scolded for not showing any emotions, making her wonder what this strange feeling that is bubbling up inside her. As the day proceeds, Frieren begins reminiscing on her time with Himmel, all whilst watching his casket be buried, only to break down crying, regretting not spending more time to get to know Himmel better. A few days afterwards, Heider reveals that he'll be heading back to the Holy City, getting one last look at Frieren as Heider states he'll probably pass away soon due to all the drinking. As Heider bids Eisen and Frieren farewell, Frieren reveals that she will be starting her new exploration into humans, asking Eisen to accompany her on her new journey. But Eisen reveals that he too has grown old, asking Frieren to not to look so sad. Seeing as there is nothing left, Frieren bids Eisen farewell, both heading in the opposite directions, only to cut to 20 years after Himmel's passing. where Frieren is lost in the forest outside the holy city. Just then a young girl appears, asking if Frieren is lost, but when Frieren asks to know where Hyder lives, the young girl takes Frieren to Hyder's home. Happy to hear that Hyder is still alive, Hyder admits that it wasn't too easy to pass away. Happy to hear that Frieren has brought some alcohol for his grave, but Hyder reveals he had stopped drinking ages ago. Seeing the adorable girl serve herself and Hyder some tea, Frieren learns the girl's name is Fern, a war orphan from the southern lands. Frieren finds it unusual for Hyder to adopt Himmel's kindness, but Hyder is more curious as to why Frieren is visiting him. Pleased to hear that Frieren just so happened to be visiting whilst on her adventure to learn more about humans. Pleased to hear this, Hyder asks if Frieren would be willing to take Fern as her apprentice mage. But Frieren is sternly against this, reminding Hyder how easy it is for apprentice mages to pass away during battle. Understanding of Frieren's decision, Hyder gives Frieren an ancient grimoire from the tomb of Uig the Sage, a book meant to contain lost spells for resurrection and immortality. Amazed that such a grimoire still existed, Frieren states that it'll take at least 5 to 6 years to decipher the text, but upon hearing this, Hyder reveals that he is indeed quite afraid of dying, asking for Frieren to give him the slightest hope for immortality. As repayment for the grimoire, Frieren agrees to teach Fern some spells. Cutting to later that day, where Frieren had finally managed to track down Fern waiting for her on the cliff of a forest, impressed that Fern is able to conceal her mana so well. Fern states that Hyder will give Fern the title of mage if Fern manages to blast a hole in a boulder across from them, something Frieren praises Hyder for setting Fern. Out of nowhere, Fern conjures a powerful beam of magic, but the beam falls short of reaching the boulder, giving Frieren some motivation to teach Fern. Happy to hear that Fern likes magic just like herself. Taking Fern to a nearby waterfall, Frieren tells Fern that long-range magic consists of 3 key factors, these being mana capacity, strength of firing the spell, and the level of the mage itself. When Fern confirms she knows this already, Frieren states that Fern's spell falling short means Fern is lacking in mana of firing strength, something Fern will need to spend time on. Seeing Fern upset, Frieren reminds Fern that her magic control is still very high, something very unique especially for such a young age. That night, Frieren shares a meal with Hyder and Fern, only to end the night by studying the grimoire. With several years of Frieren training Fern, all 3 spending time together, and Frieren deciphering the grimoire, Frieren reports to Hyder that Fern has grown so much in 4 years. With Hyder happy to hear that, Frieren mentions how she'll probably finish deciphering the grimoire before Fern becomes a fully fledged mage. But as Frieren turns to check on Hyder's reaction, she spots Hyder has collapsed. As Frieren moves Hyder to his bed, Hyder apologizes for the trouble, asking Frieren to not look so sad. With Frieren promising to decipher grimoire fast, Frieren first heads out to inform Fern that Hyder has collapsed, asking Fern to halt her training to look after Hyder. Sadly, Fern states that if she stops now, she won't be able to show Hyder how strong she's gotten before Hyder passes, revealing that Hyder was the one that saved her. Flashing back, a young Fern is seen grasping onto a necklace with a picture of her family, wondering if she should take her own life. Out of nowhere, Hyder appears, advising Fern to reconsider her actions as Hyder once had a friend that had passed away. Hyder states that his friend was the epitome of justice, and Hyder had wished that his life was taken instead of his friend, but since his friend is no longer with him, Hyder states that he'll stay alive to ensure the memories of his precious friends live on. With the young Fern remembering the memories she had with her family, Fern in the present declares that Hyder had always feared of leaving Fern alone. Therefore, Fern states that she wants to show Hyder she can fend for herself before Hyder passes away. With Frieren understanding Fern's wishes, Frieren states that she'll allow Fern to do as she pleases, heading back to continue deciphering the grimoire. As more time passes, Fern is seen continuing to improve her mana capacity and firing strength, all whilst Frieren finishes up deciphering the grimoire, only to ask if Hyder already knew the grimoire didn't contain any spells to bring back the dead nor immortality. Hyder reveals that magic for immortality doesn't exist. Happy to hear that Frieren now considers Fern a mage, meaning Frieren can finally take Fern with her on her travels. With Frieren realizing Hyder had tricked her into training Fern, Hyder states that her reward is in a nearby drawer, asking for Frieren to take Fern and leave by tonight. Frieren calls out Hyder for trying to act tough, revealing that Fern has been waiting to say goodbye to Hyder, breaking down as Frieren orders Hyder to spend his remaining time with Fern. As Frieren goes on a walk, Frieren learns that Hyder had saved Fern, knowing that Himmel would have done the exact same thing, leaving Hyder and Fern alone, only to confirm that Fern had managed to reach the boulder. The next day marks the death of Hyder, prompting Fern and Frieren to pour out some booze on Hyder's tombstone, only for them to head elsewhere. With 26 years passing since Himmel's death, Fern and Frieren continue to adventure together, both completing tasks in order to acquire new spells. Their most recent spell produces warm tea, whereas some previous ones involved removing rust from bronze statues and turning sweet grapes sour. As the two head to their next adventure, they meet up with an old lady, guided to an old statue of Himmel. The lady reveals that her town was attacked by a monster years ago, but luckily Himmel had arrived and saved them, ultimately leading to a statue of Himmel being made of him. When the old lady mentions how sad it is to see the statue all beat up, Frieren corrects her, stating that it's Himmel's fault for accepting a statue of himself be made, something that reminds the lady that there was an elf with Himmel at the time. Without saying any more, Frieren helps clean up the statue, pleasing the lady, but the old lady finds it sad that the scenery around the statue is too plain. Before Frieren can use a spell to grow some flowers, Frieren suddenly remembers Himmel's favorite flower, the blue moon weed. As the old lady takes them back to her home, she's surprised to hear Frieren knows about the blue moon weeds, as they used to grow in a nearby forest, but have since long died out. Seeing Fern acting weird, Frieren asks to see what Fern is hiding, discovering that Fern has been hiding seed rats in her coat, intending on setting them free. With both girls heading out, Frieren states that they'll be heading to the nearby forest in hopes of finding some blue moon weeds, something Frieren acknowledges is for her own selfish desires. With several months of Frieren and Fern searching for the blue moon weed, the girls grow used to spending time in town with the old lady and out in the fields. One day, Fern has a chat with the old lady, sad to see that Frieren is fixated on searching for this non-existent flower, even though Frieren could be saving lives. Hearing Fern so intellectually convey her feelings, the lady hands Fern a bag of seeds, asking Fern to tell Frieren how she truly feels. Mustering up the courage, Fern tells Frieren how she feels, prompting Frieren to apologize, as she promises to end her search soon. Fern demands to know when, but Frieren points out that a nearby seed rat is leaving behind a trail and that they should follow it. As the girls chase after the seed rat, Fern wonders why Frieren is so fixated on collecting spells. But Frieren states she only started collecting spells because a special someone had begun complimenting her knowledge on spells. As both girls stop in front of an abandoned building, Frieren states that seed rats often hide seeds in different locations. But when Frieren catches a blue petal, Frieren leaps onto the top of the building. Flashing back, Frieren remembers a time when Himmel had told Frieren his favorite flower was the blue moon weed, hoping to show Frieren one day. On top of the building, Frieren is amazed to see so many blue moon weeds, grateful to finally lay eyes on them. As Fern follows after Frieren, Fern still can't understand why Frieren loves collecting spells. But Frieren reminds Fern that Fern became a mage to impress Hyder, something very similar to Frieren's situation. As the girls return to show off their work to the old lady praises the girls for decorating the statue. But before Frieren leaves, she repays Hyder for his gift in the past. On the 27th year since Himmel's passing, Frieren and Fern are seen visiting a trading city of Worm, where Frieren has asked to split up to restock on supplies. When Fern calls out Frieren for making her buy everything, Fern has a bad feeling when Frieren goes off on her own to buy things, having bought a massive skull in the past, clothes dissolving potions, and even random books. When the two split up, Fern chooses to follow Frieren, fearing their traveling expenses will go to waste, but spots Frieren in front of an accessory store. With Frieren distraught at what to purchase, Frieren ends up settling on something, prompting Fern to continue to tail Frieren. Whilst passing through some alleys, Fern wonders if she should leave Frieren be. But when she overhears that Frieren is planning on buying some desserts, Fern gets jealous, having not had any desserts in months. Following Frieren into a smoky tavern, Fern gets worried that Frieren is lost, spotting Frieren speaking with some scary-looking men. As Frieren leaves the tavern, Fern notices that she's heading back to the inn, rushing to finish off her duties, only to apologize for finishing shopping so late. Brushing that aside, Frieren takes Fern to the recommended dessert store, allowing Fern to buy whatever dessert she wants, revealing that she had been saving up money to treat Fern and herself. When Fern asks what Frieren would like, Fern states that she already knows Frieren wants Merker pudding, reminding Frieren of her time with the heroes, where Himmel had mentioned that he knows Frieren's favorite dessert is the Merker pudding. When Frieren feels bad for not knowing much about the others, Himmel mentions his favorite food is an omelet, Eisen's favorite food are sour grapes, and Heider simply loves alcohol. As Fern digs into her dessert, Frieren apologizes for not knowing more about Fern, handing Fern a gift, pleasing Fern as Frieren remembered Fern's birthday. Fern smiles upon receiving a hair ornament, telling Frieren that it's enough of a birthday gift that Frieren remembered her birthday, confusing Frieren. The next day, the two leave the city, but as Fern walks alongside Frieren with her new hair ornament, Fern asks what the end goal of their adventures are. Frieren simply states that she's simply collecting as many spells as possible, but she does want to retrace her memories with the hero party, something Fern is curious about. When Fern walks beside Frieren, Frieren realizes that Fern is now 16 and taller than her, but gets jealous at how Fern has already outgrown her in other areas. In the Forest of Grobe, Frieren is seen testing out Fern's defensive spells, pointing out how the gaps in Fern's barrier will be the downfall. When Frieren fires multiple projectiles, Fern manages to block with a simple barrier around her body, but ultimately runs out of mana. As the two continue through the forest, Frieren reminds Fern that defensive magic is powerful, but it depletes mana very fast. Therefore, it's best to only cast barriers at the points of impact. As they both cross a river, Fern states that she simply needs to master a single defensive spell, but Frieren scolds her for not reading the book she gave her, as magic theory is just as important as practical applications. Finally arriving at a village, Fern wonders what spells Frieren intends to collect at the village, but Frieren states that she's here for other reasons. Upon approaching some villagers, a village elder immediately recognizes Frieren's white elven hair, leading Frieren to where Qual was sealed. Along the way, Frieren tells Fern that Qual is the Elder Sage of Corruption, a demon that terrorized people for 80 years, up until Himmel and his party sealed him. When Frieren wonders how the Elder knew who she was, the Elder reveals that Himmel would always visit up until his passing, but spoke highly of Frieren, stating that she would take over and watch the seal when Himmel's was gone. Upon arriving at Qual's seal, Frieren confirms that the seal is indeed weakening, but Frieren will break the seal and defeat Qual the next day. With Fern and Frieren staying the night, Fern deduces that Frieren was the one that sealed Qual, wondering why the heroes choose to seal the demon. Frieren reveals that their party were unable to defeat the demon, as Qual was a powerful mage, having invented the Zultrak piercing spell, first of its kind that could pierce any sort of defense and destroy the target's body. Legend says that 40% of adventurers and 70% of mages were defeated by that single spell, but hearing something so powerful, Fern wonders how Qual can be defeated, but Frieren reveals such a powerful spell has its downsides. When Fern continues to ask more questions, Frieren scolds Fern for not reading the book she gave her, stating that Fern will have her questions answered tomorrow. With the big day arriving, the two girls stand before Qual, only for Frieren to warn Fern to be on guard, all whilst Frieren lifts Qual's seal. Glad to be free, Qual learns that he's been sealed for 80 years and that the Demon King had been defeated in his absence. Annoyed, Qual proceeds to cast his Zultrak, prompting Frieren to instruct Fern to erect a barrier. But when the dust clears, Fern's barrier manages to easily block Qual's killing spell. With Fern demanding to know why her basic barrier was able to block such a deadly spell, Frieren reveals that ever since Qual was sealed away, all of humankind had dedicated resources to studying and defending against the killing spell. After a few years, the humans incorporated said spells into their systems, and as a result, all types of defense magic were improved thanks to Qual. Amazed at what the humans were able to develop in the 80 years that he was sealed, Qual analyzes Fern's barrier, noting how the barrier changes depending on the type of offensive magic, meaning the spell consumes a huge amount of mana. As Qual erupts with power, Frieren orders Fern to protect both of them as efficiently as possible, prompting Fern to erect barriers only in the location of Qual's projectiles. Unleashing a massive beam of magic, Qual is impressed that Fern is still able to block his overwhelming magic, but spots Frieren is now floating in the sky, helplessly watching as Frieren casts her own Zultrak killing spell. As Qual begins to disappear, Frieren and Fern head back to the village where Frieren is thanked by the village elder, grateful that they can now live in peace. When the elder hands Frieren his hat, Frieren recognizes the elder as the cheeky brat that flipped her skirt when they first sealed Qual. As the girls leave by carriage, Fern is seen finally reading the book Frieren gave her. But Frieren is glad that she could fulfill Himmel's trust and bring peace to the village once and for all. With the girls heading over to the Grand Channel, Frieren is sad to see the beach is littered with debris, unfortunate as the nearby village used to all clean the beach, but now there isn't enough manpower to tidy up the beach. The village elder requests that Frieren clean up the beach, handing Frieren a grimoire belonging to the legendary mage Flam. But Fern notices something suspicious. As Frieren accepts the offer, the elder leaves for now, but Fern states that she believes the grimoire is fake, something that Frieren already knows. Frieren is happy to see that Fern has been studying, revealing almost all books about Flam are usually fakes. But Frieren states that she needed an excuse to help return the beach to its former beauty. Skipping ahead to when snow has begun to fall, Fern is seen visiting a local bakery, chatting with the shopkeeper as Fern has been frequently purchasing bread from the bakery in the past 3 months. With Fern noting how it's already winter, Fern returns to a messy room, disappointed as Frieren is still asleep. As Frieren struggles to leave bed, Fern is forced to help change, dress, and feed Frieren, dragging the sleepy elf through town and towards the beach. As the girls begin cleaning the beach, Fern points out how sloppy Frieren is, having been forced to take care of Frieren as if she were Frieren's mother. Fern wonders how Frieren behaved during her time with the hero party, but Frieren mentions how they were all very okay with Frieren oversleeping, but Frieren did get scolded once. With Fern curious to know more, the girls wrap up the day with a big fire using the debris, only to enjoy a nice dinner, reporting to the elder that they only have 1/3 of the job left. The elder wonders if the girl will be done by the New Year's festival, something Frieren says will be possible. But when the elder mentions how Frieren can finally join them for watching the sunset this time, Frieren acts awfully cold. The next day, Fern asks if the reason Frieren wanted to clean the beach was related to the festival, learning that every New Year, the villagers would watch the sunrise. Frieren mentions how the beach is meant to beautifully reflect the sunrise, but admits that she never woke up early enough to actually watch the sunrise. With more time passing by, Fern continues to nurture our poor Frieren out of bed, both exploring the wrecked ships, discovering hidden gems, only to officially clean the beach of all debris. Completely mesmerized by the beach's beauty, the elder asks if Frieren will be joining them for the sunrise this year, shocking Fern when Frieren agrees to wake up early to see the sunrise. Fern wonders if Frieren will be able to wake up in time for the sunrise, but Frieren states that she'll simply stay up all night and that she wants to see what's so amazing about this sunrise. As Frieren stays up that night, she thinks about a time when Himmel had scolded Frieren for sleeping in and missed the New Year's sunrise in the same village, confused as to why a mere sunrise would cause Himmel to be so upset they didn't get to see it together. Sadly, during the morning, Fern realized that Frieren is fast asleep, forced to drag Frieren out of bed, fearing that they'll miss the sunset. With both girls staring out into the horizon, Frieren notes how there is nothing special about the sunrise, but upon seeing that Fern is mesmerized by the sunrise's beauty, Frieren admits that Himmel was right, as she's enjoying the sunrise with Fern. Flashing back, we see Frieren and the hero party visiting the graves of Eisen's family, learning that his village was attacked by demons. Hyder chooses to kneel before the graves, praying for their souls to go to heaven. But Eisen mentions how he doesn't believe in the afterlife, prompting Frieren to reveal that thousands of years ago, everyone believed there was no afterlife. But since magic can't observe where souls go, it's hard to define what is truth and what isn't. Hyder states that since there is no actual proof for either side, Hyder likes to think there is a heaven. That way the people that are doing good for the world can at least pass believing that their life was worth it. With the hero party joining Hyder in praying for Eisen's family, we cut to the present where Eisen is once again praying for his family, currently located in the Brett region. Out of nowhere, Frieren calls out to Eisen, weird as they haven't spoken to each other ever since Himmels passed away 30 years ago. As they all sit down for some tea, Eisen is shocked to see Frieren has an apprentice, but Frieren asks if Eisen needs help with anything. Eisen mentions how Hyder and him have been updating each other with letters. Heading out, they all head to Volume 50 Basin, a location Frieren recognizes, learning that Eisen intends to search for notes from Flam, the legendary mage. When Frieren reminds Eisen that most records on Flam are fake, Eisen reveals that Hyder figured out the general location of Flam's true notes, based on records from the Holy City. With Frieren convinced, they all agree to start looking for a massive tree. But upon seeing Fern disappointed, Frieren states that they should hurry, surprising Eisen as Frieren never cared for anyone else's time. With the gang beginning to search the entire forest, they spend the night eating and sleeping throughout the forest, only to search across the sea and in the skies. One day, Fern states that she has found a massive tree near some ruins, all beginning to head towards the tree. But Frieren uses the opportunity to ask Eisen why he's searching for Flam's notes. Eisen reveals that on the day of Himmel's death, Eisen had seen how regretful Frieren felt for not using more time to get to know Himmel, revealing that the notes left behind were said to allow contact with the dead. When Frieren states that she doesn't believe in such nonsense, Eisen states that it's better to know for sure, plus Himmel and Hyder had agreed prior to help Frieren get to know Himmel better. Having made it to the massive tree, Fern states that there is a powerful barrier surrounding the tree. But when Frieren heads over to inspect the tree, she utters that even after 1,000 years, her master is still superior to her. Flashing back, Frieren is seen with her master, wondering why her master is so fixated on protecting a small sapling. But her master states that in 1,000 years' time, Frieren will grow to appreciate her master's lessons, reminding Frieren that her master is Flam, the legendary mage. Within an instant, Frieren dispels the barrier guarding the entrance to Flam's notes. Upon glancing at the notes, Frieren is surprised the notes had already been opened to the page regarding communication with the dead, surprised her master knew Frieren would return. Flam states that the north of the continent housed the land of Oriole, where all the souls rest, a location that Flam had used to speak with her fallen allies. When Fern wonders if the notes can be trusted, Eisen reminds Frieren to consider the best-case scenario when unsure, prompting Frieren to reveal that Oriole is in the same direction as Indy, the current Demon King castle. With Eisen asking Frieren to go for Himmel's sake, they all head back home via carriage, where Frieren is fast asleep, dreading the thought of going to such a cold place like the Demon King's castle. Sparking up a conversation, Eisen asks how Frieren is treating Fern, impressed to hear that Frieren is retracing her adventures with the hero party, but is also trying to get to know Fern better. Hearing this, Eisen thinks back to how cold Frieren was back then, having never imagined Frieren would take on an apprentice, but reassures Fern that Frieren is a great teacher. As they all return to Eisen's home, Eisen apologizes for not coming with them, checking to see if Frieren remembers the path to Indy, relieved to hear Frieren still remembers it through the Wool region, across the Regal Canyon, and past the Northern Land checkpoints. As Frieren begins to leave, Eisen informs Fern that it'll be a 10-year adventure, reminding Frieren of her adventure with the hero party. But Frieren states that it won't take too long. As Fern leaves with Frieren, Fern thinks about how she spent half her life with Frieren, flashing back to one of Fern's last conversations with Hyder. Hyder jokes about haunting Fern if she doesn't behave around Frieren, but Fern surprises Hyder with how mature she's grown, making Hyder promise to visit her when he passes. With Fern resting by Frieren's side, the girls ride a carriage to the nearby town of the Will region. But as the girls head through town, they're stopped by a shopkeeper that warns the girls not to go into the mountains. The shopkeeper says there are rumors of ghosts taking people away. But when Frieren gets curious about what type of ghosts, the girls head around town asking for everyone's stories. Apparently, the townsfolk saw ghosts of their departed family in the mountains, with some people saying that the ghosts spoke. When Fern wonders if the work of undeads, Frieren states that undeads wouldn't appear as ghosts, as undeads normally appear in the form of rotting corpses or skeletons. With the girls heading to the rooms, Fern notes how Frieren probably knows what is causing the ghosts to appear in the mountains, but is cut off when Frieren states that they'll only be staying for a single night in town. Fern demands that Frieren help out the villagers, but seeing Fern so serious about helping the villagers, Frieren agrees to help. As both girls head into the mountains, they explore the locations of said disappearances, where Frieren quizzes Fern on what type of magic created the ghosts, satisfied to hear Fern believes it's illusion magic. Heading deeper into the mountains, Fern briefly remembers a monster that used illusion magic to hunt its prey, a monster Frieren states is the Einsam. The Einsam usually uses illusion magic, creating phantoms of people's loved ones to lure them in only to devour the targets. Luckily, Frieren mentions how the Einsam's illusion magic can be easily destroyed by a mage's projectile, but warns Fern that it may be difficult, as Frieren had to destroy the illusions of her master begging for her life. Upon entering a misty forest, Frieren orders Fern to prepare for the worst, only for Fern to spot an illusion of Hyder in the distance. Preparing to destroy the illusion, Fern suddenly hears Hyder speak fondly of her, realizing the monster is using Fern's memories to put Fern at ease. When Frieren tries to help Fern out, Frieren suddenly spots an illusion of Himmel, surprised as she was expecting an illusion of her master. Wondering if she has changed, Frieren nonchalantly destroys Himmel's illusion, clearing the misty forest and revealing the Einsam to Fern, prompting Fern to disintegrate Hyder's illusion and the monster. As Frieren reassures Fern that Hyder won't be mad that Fern struck an illusion of him, the girls head into the Regal Canyon, spotting a massive crimson dragon along with its nest, where Frieren spots the grimoire she's been looking for. Frieren states that dragons use magic-infused items to build their nest, asking Fern to take out the solar dragon. But when Fern conjures a powerful spell, her spell simply deflects off the dragon's thick exterior. With the dragon now awake, Frieren cries that they should flee, forcing Fern to lure away the dragon. But having barely managed to lose the dragon, Fern cries that as mages they will have a hard time defeating the dragon. Frieren acknowledges Fern's cries. Frieren states that they'll need some help, flashing back to when Frieren and Eisen were camping out in the forest. Eisen states that he has an apprentice of his own by the name of Stark, stating that he'll be a great frontliner for Frieren's adventures and that Stark lives in the village near the Regal Canyon. As the girls visit the nearby town, they wonder why the villagers aren't more afraid of the nearby dragon. But Fern asks why Frieren wants grimoire so badly. Frieren reveals that the grimoire has a spell that allows mages to see through clothes, weirding Fern out. But out of nowhere, an old lady states that Stark wants to meet the girls. Surprised, the girls follow the old lady, learning that 3 years ago the Crimson Dragon had massacred their town. But luckily Stark had arrived, scaring the dragon away, and ever since has been protecting their town. Upon arriving near a massive rocky wall, Stark is seen playing with some town kids, asking Frieren and Fern to not agitate the dragon so much. Stark tries to point out that he received a mark from a shadow dragon, but Frieren simply asks for Stark to drop the act. When Stark learns that Frieren used to adventure with Eisen, Stark asks for the old lady and kids to give them some privacy, revealing that he's proud that he abandoned Eisen. Frieren asks why Stark doesn't just slay the dragon, but Stark wants to know why the girls are here, learning that they've come to recruit Stark and also want the grimoire in the dragon's nest. Stark gets confused as to why Frieren wants the grimoire so badly, but doesn't mind joining Frieren's party, but reveals that he has had trouble defeating the dragon, asking for Frieren's help. Frieren states that they can defeat the dragon together if Stark distracts the dragon for 30 seconds. But upon seeing Stark refuse such an offer, Frieren deduces that Stark has never fought a monster before. Stark breaks down, begging for Frieren's help, admitting that when he first confronted the dragon, he was so scared seeing the beast. But strangely, after a while the dragon flew away and Stark was praised by the villagers. With Fern disgusted by how pathetic Stark looks, Frieren states that she has full faith in Stark, heading over to a massive fissure in the nearby wall, only to sense something. As the girls leave, Frieren states that they'll be meeting back here tomorrow, hinting at the fact that Stark should use this opportunity to grow. That night, Frieren and Fern enjoy a nice dinner, all whilst the villagers praise Stark for being a kind person. Fern still can't help but see Stark as a cowardly boy, but Frieren brings up the first time Fern fought a monster, apologizing for teasing Fern. With the girls heading back to their inn, Fern wonders why the dragon doesn't just attack the village. But Frieren hints at the fact that it may be Stark, suggesting that Fern visit Stark if she's curious about who he is. With Fern heading to visit Stark, Frieren sits in her room, thinking back to when she had asked Eisen if Stark is strong. Eisen reveals that Stark was the only person to have fled like a coward when the monsters attacked his hometown, someone Eisen states is exactly like himself. Hence he taught Stark everything he knew. In the dead of night, Stark is seen wielding his axe, cleaving it into the rocky wall, digging a deeper and deeper fissure with every swing. With Stark standing before the giant fissure, Stark turns to spot Fern behind him, having just been caught for creating the massive fissure. Fern asks why Stark doesn't just slay the nearby dragon, terrorizing the nearby village. But Stark states that since the dragon hasn't attacked yet, there is no need for him to slay the beast. As Stark begins to leave, Fern asks if Stark will slay the dragon when it does attack, learning that although Stark knows the village depends on him, he still might consider running if the dragon is too great. Stark reveals that he had gained a mark on his face during a spar with his master Ison, believing that Ison was mad at him as Ison never praised Stark. Leaning in to inspect Stark's hand, Fern concludes that Stark would never run from a fight, confusing Stark as he wonders how Fern would know. Fern reveals that on her first battle with a deadly monster, Fern had begun to flee in terror, but when she realized Frieren wouldn't help her, Fern had no choice but to steel her resolve and fight. Fern states that although Stark is a coward, she believes Stark will rise to the challenge to protect the village when the time comes, something that makes Stark think about Ison. Fern is seen reporting her chat with Stark to Frieren, but when Frieren heads to the fissure to look for Stark, she's disappointed to see that Stark has fled the scene. When Frieren states that they'll be slaying the dragon instead, Fern refuses to leave the safety of a nearby tree, but out of nowhere Stark appears, asking if he only needs to distract the dragon for 30 seconds. Stark states that if he were to pass away during the battle, Stark asks for Frieren to guarantee the dragon is slayed, confusing Frieren as to why Stark is willing to give his life for the safety of the village. Stark reminds Frieren that he lived in the village for 3 years, cutting to later that day, where the three are now standing before the red dragon, prompting Frieren to tease Stark for shaking out of fear. Frieren reveals that Ison showed the same fear before a great fight, as Ison would embrace the fear, something Frieren sees in Stark. Hearing that his master also would fear his battles, Stark marches into the range of the dragon, but Frieren notes that the dragon is being cautious as to not attack due to the enemy it's facing. As the dragon unleashes its fiery breath, Stark begins making his way towards the dragon, ducking and weaving until he's able to close the distance between himself and the beast. Flashing back, Frieren asks why Ison had hit Stark during their last spar, but Ison reveals that he feels terrible for hitting his student. But in that moment, Ison had sensed immense power from Stark, even beginning to shake. As Frieren watches Stark shatter the claws of the dragon, Stark chooses to stay close to the dragon, grabbing onto it as it takes off. Being flung into the air, Stark senses that the dragon is lining up another breath of fire, gripping his axe, only to cleave the dragon into the ground. Seeing an opening, Stark cries for Fern and Frieren to finish off the dragon, but Frieren stops Fern from making a move, declaring that Stark had soloed the dragon. Shocked at his own power, Frieren rushes to congratulate Stark on his first battle, but more importantly, Frieren is excited to steal all the loot in the dragon's nest. Seeing Frieren fixated on the random items, Stark mentions how Ison would always talk about how Frieren made their hero's journey ridiculous and fun, cutting back to a time when Frieren had decided to make shaved ice in a dungeon. Ison had grown annoyed as they were wasting so much time, but Himmel reminds Ison that they have all the time in the world, so they should enjoy the journey as they go. As the three return to tell the village the good news, they all begin heading out, only to try out the grimoire. Fern uses the spell to see through Stark's clothes, disgusted that he's so small, but Stark states that he'll be joining Frieren and Fern on their future journeys. In the fortress city of Vol located in the Regal Canyon, Frieren and gang are refused entry towards one of the northern checkpoints by the guard, hearing that monsters are more active than ever. As the guard heads to chat with the Castellan, they warn the gang not to cause trouble in the town, but Frieren is perfectly okay with staying in town, planning on exploring the magic shops in town. Seeing Fern's cold glare, Frieren states that she'll head over to book them a room, but when Stark offers to get food with Fern, Fern's glare sends Stark in search of food alone. Now alone, Fern overhears that the Northern Army plans to defeat the enemies in 2 years, meaning their checkpoint won't be open for another 2 years. Cutting to Stark, he has entered a familiar tavern, served the Jumbo Berry special dessert, confused as he used to split the dessert with Ison, but now the dessert looks so small. Stark notes how he has gotten bigger, having saw his master's broad shoulder as something to admire, but after some time, he outgrew his master. Out of nowhere, Fern appears, eyeing down Stark's dessert, but instead Fern chooses to order a glass of milk, diligently sitting next to Stark. Fern asks how Stark would feel staying in the city for 2 more years, relieved to hear that Stark thinks it's annoying as well, but Stark gets weirded out by how Fern is acting. Heading outside to assess the walls, Stark asks if they could simply fly over the gates, but Fern reminds Stark that a barrier has been erected to prevent flying monsters from entering. With no other choice, they head over to the Merchants Guild, but are sad to learn that all trades towards the northern land have been shut down, meaning that they can't sneak out via that way either. Coming up with another idea, the two decide to visit the Black Market and Thieves Guild, using Stark's connections and demeanor to find a solution, but sadly, there is still nothing that can be done. As the two stand above the walls overlooking the view, Frieren wonders why Stark is being so cooperative, deducing that Stark has an ulterior motive to leave the walls, but Stark simply utters that he's running out of time. Stark mentions how Eisen visited this exact location when he was younger, telling Stark stories about how he visited the northern lands with his hero party, enjoying every second of the 10-year journey. Stark reveals that he intends on having a great journey with Frieren and Frieren, promising to return and repay Eisen with stories of his own before Eisen passes. As both return to town, Frieren spots Frieren acting strange, cornering Frieren in an alley only to learn that the town's guards are looking for Frieren. Out of nowhere, the same guard at the checkpoint kneels to apologize to Frieren, prompting the Castellan of the city to apologize as well for his guard being so rude to Frieren. When Frieren reassures the Castellan that she wasn't offended, the Castellan believes that Frieren is here to slay the remnants of the Demon Lord's army, allowing Frieren through the checkpoint, but this disappoints Frieren. With a massive celebration acknowledging Frieren and her party's departure, Frieren mentions how she never liked the outlandish welcomes and departures. Stark wonders if this is how Eisen felt, making Frieren suddenly remember a similar time when she departed with the hero party, curious as to what parallels will arise next. Flashing back, Frieren is seen walking amongst her hero party, all discussing the validity of Flam's grimoire, especially with the countless fakes and imitations that exist. Waking up early, Frieren spots Stark and Frieren making breakfast, shocking Frieren as this is a rare scenario. Later that day on Ing Road, the gang were tasked with clearing a path for a merchant, grateful as the road had been blocked off due to a landslide. When Stark sees Frieren's magic, he wonders why Frieren doesn't just carry the merchant's cart over with magic, but Frieren is strongly against helping everyone, not just the single merchant. Taking a quick break, Stark thanks the merchant for the water, wondering what may have caused the landslide, surprised to hear that it must have been the skirmishes between the northern lands and the demons. Getting back to work, Frieren requests that Stark help her out a bit, but Stark asks that Frieren be more casual with him. But when Frieren tries speaking with Stark more casually, Stark gets insulted, annoying Frieren as they continue to work. With the road cleared, the merchant offers to lead the gang to the nearby village, amazed that he finally got to meet an elf. Frieren acknowledges that although elves live long lives, elves are slowly going extinct, as most don't intend on reproducing, with the most recent elf Frieren met being around 400 years ago. Finally arriving at town, the gang spot a line of merchants lining up to enter the town, learning that tonight is the Liberation Festival. The festival is meant to commemorate the hero party ridding the area of demons, along with decorating the statues of the heroes in town. Frieren still can't understand why humans throw parties, but the merchant reminds Frieren that it's been 80 years since the Demon King was slayed, and in human years 80 years is a whole lifetime. Flashing back, Frieren remembers a time when Himmel had requested that their statues be placed through various towns, annoying Frieren as she believed Himmel simply wanted to show off, but Himmel reveals that the statues are meant to remind Frieren of their adventures together as the hero party. That night, the gang stand among the crowd, watching as the hero party is celebrated, but the merchant does note how Frieren looks very similar to the elf statue. The next morning they continue their journey, heading to the Graf Granat's domain, where they notice an abundance of guards surveying the town. When Frieren wonders who should do the shopping, Frieren suddenly freezes, equipping her staff, only to state that she senses demons approaching. When some demons turn the nearby corner, they spot Frieren charging up a spell, but luckily a nearby knight tackles and stops Frieren from firing the spell. Approaching Frieren, the demon asks if Graf Granat had hired Frieren to attack him, but Graf states that he's not foolish enough to attack Lord Lugner out in the open, especially since Lugner is her seeking peace. Kneeling down, Lugner states that he senses Frieren's bloodlust-filled glare, shaming Frieren for looking at him as if he were a wild beast. Frieren fires back, stating that Lugner is simply using human speech to blend in and manipulate the humans. But having heard enough, Frieren is dragged away to be locked up. With Stark and Frieren shocked at what just happened, they choose to visit Frieren, who is locked up in the dungeon under the mansion. Frieren states that she'll only be locked up for a measly 2 to 3 years, but Fern scolds Frieren for always wanting to waste time. Frieren asks who the peace envoy demons are, learning that the envoys are linked to Aura the Guillotine, one of the 7 sages of destruction who served the Demon King. Apparently, 28 years ago, Aura had regained her strength and had been fighting with the domain of Graf Granats. But now Aura has sent envoys to seek peace, something Frieren states sounds fishy. When Stark wonders why they can't just talk things out with the demons, Frieren questions if Stark or Fern know how demons learn to speak the human language, revealing that demons only eat humans. During her time with the hero party, Himmel and Frieren were forced to hunt down a child demon, having supposedly devoured the child of a human couple. But when Himmel went to slay the creature, Himmel couldn't since the demon behaved just like a child. When Frieren offered to shoulder the burden, the town's chief had ordered everyone to spare the demon, giving it a second chance. But that was something Frieren had advised everyone against doing. With days passing, the chief had given the demon girl a place to stay along with food to eat, but Frieren kept a close eye on her, all whilst the chief and her daughter considered the demon girl as one of their own. One day, the chief's building was burnt down by the demon girl, and the chief ended up passing due to being inflicted by the demon. When Himmel demands to know why the demon killed the chief, the demon slowly approaches the couple of the first daughter she ate, offering the chief's daughter as a replacement. Sensing that the humans hate her, the demon girl takes the chief's daughter as hostage, but Himmel easily recaptures the chief's daughter, permitting Frieren to slay the demon. When Frieren fires an incineration spell at the demon, Frieren states that demons don't have a sense of family, forced to live and roam alone since birth. But on that day, Frieren learned that the demon girl had intentionally manipulated everyone, knowing that she would get to live a little longer. Frieren states that Flam described monsters that can speak as demons, as they imitate human speech to lure other humans in, something Stark and Fern find disturbing. As Stark and Fern leave, we cut to Lugner, sitting in the mansion and waiting for a meeting with Graf. Lugner admits that Frieren was right about demons, curious as to where he recognizes Frieren from, stating that they demons will forever hunt down humans. As Frieren deduces that the town won't last too long, but at the same time Lugner and his followers enter Graf's son's bedroom, learning that Graf's son was gifted a sword by the king, but had passed away 10 years ago whilst fighting Aura. Raising his son's sword to Lugner's neck, Graf reveals that he has brought Lugner here to slaughter him. But upon glancing around the room, Lugner notices that Graf has been keeping his son's room clean for the past 10 years. Lugner reveals that the humans slayed his father, reminding Graf that they've come here to stop unnecessary bloodshed, ultimately convincing Graf and his knights to lower their blades. With Graf sending Lugner and his followers to the guest room, Lugner admits that he doesn't know what a father is, but has identified Graf as an empathetic man. Lugner states that he'll grow close to Graf and have him lower the town's defensive barrier, and only then will Lady Aura's forces conquer the town. Lugner suddenly notices Drought is missing, learning from Liney that Drought has disappeared to eliminate an obstacle, cutting to Drought entering the underground dungeons, slaying a guard only to enter Frieren's cell. Drought declares that he's here to kill Frieren, knowing that Frieren is the only loose end that can ruin their scheme. But Frieren warns Drought that she is stronger than Aura herself. Smirking, Drought doubts Frieren's strength, dragging her into the air with a single wire around her neck, impressed that Frieren had encased her neck with mana to prevent her decapitation. Drought states that his wire is the strongest amongst all the demons, tugging harder on the spell, but Frieren still manages to defend her neck. When Frieren admits defeat, Drought smirks, but Frieren scolds Drought for letting his guard down, suddenly cutting off one of Drought's arms. When Drought tries to bind Frieren with multiple wires, Frieren simply severs Drought's other arm, instantly disintegrating Drought before he can speak. Frieren states that she'll simply slay the other 2 demons and convince Graf that the demons are evil, but upon exiting her cell, Frieren spots the guard outside is dead. Cutting to Stark and Fern, they enjoy a nice meal in the peaceful town, both shoveling down their food, as they realize they need to convince Graf to free Frieren before any harm comes to the town. Stark notes how earlier he could sense Lugner's immense power, pissed that Lugner didn't even pay attention to Stark, as Lugner knew he could dismantle everyone but Frieren in mere seconds. Beginning to shake out of fear, Stark accidentally spills his drink on himself, offered a handkerchief by Fern. As Stark cleans himself up, They both agree that they need to head over to protect Graf in case the demons attack. But when Stark tries to return the handkerchief, Fern prefers Stark keep it. Following Liney and Lugner, Liney reports that she can no longer sense Drott nearby. Curious as to who Frieren is, but out of nowhere Graf and his knights rush into the room. Graf reports that Frieren has escaped, prompting Lugner to offer up Liney's location magic, but Graf refuses, asking where Drott is. When Lugner tries to come up with an excuse, Graf has his men surround Lugner and Liney, revealing that he knows Frieren is a powerful mage, demanding to know where Drott is. With no other option, Lugner draws his own blood, instantly decapitating all the knights in the room, only to turn his attention to Graf. Lugner reveals how excited he is to finally be killing, nonchalantly pricking his own finger on Graf's sword, only to use the blood to pierce Graf's stomach. With Graf bleeding out, Lugner states they need Graf to help remove the town's barrier, cutting to later that evening where Stark and Fern are walking through town, only for Fern to detect Frieren is in a disguise. Fern asks why Frieren escaped, learning that Frieren had to dispose of one of Lugner's demons, but had to escape since the guard outside her door was killed, and Frieren would be blamed for it, since Demon's body dissipates into mana when they die. Frieren states that she'll be leaving town, but Fern and Stark remind Frieren that there are still demons in town, making Frieren suggest that Fern and Stark handle the demons in town. Seeing the two unsure about their skills, Frieren reassures the two that they'll be fine, happy to see Fern drag the cowardly Stark towards the demons. At the same time, Frieren detects a powerful ball of mana 10 kilometers from town watching them, deducing that it must be Aura the guillotine. But knowing that Aura is strong, Frieren reasons she should finish this quickly. In the dead of night, Fern and Stark sneak past a body of water, head over the walls of the mansion, only to jump into the mansion through one of its windows. At the same time, Lugner tells Graf about his love for magic, revealing that most demons spend their entire life researching and honing their own particular magic. But Lugner does acknowledge how strange magic is, admiring Flam's unique barrier that prevents any type of demon from entering. Lugner speculates that Flam's genius barrier casted 1,000 years ago is stronger than any present spell. But since Graf and his Granat family has maintained the barrier for generations, Lugner demands to know how to control the barriers, leaving Lugner to consider his options. Lugner orders Liney to search for any grimoires in the bedroom, whilst he searches the study room. Seeing an opening, Stark sneaks into Graf's room, attempting to free Garf, but his trembling hands fail to cut the magic binds around Graf. Graf asks Stark to take his Granat amulet and flee with the citizens, but Stark refuses, stating that he won't leave Graf behind. Out of nowhere, Lugner and Liney reappear, demanding to know if Graf knows Stark, but Graf simply states he's a lost child. When Lugner agrees to let Stark flee, Graf feels bad, spotting how much Stark is trembling, but Stark gets annoyed that Lugner is underestimating him. Gripping his axe, Stark dashes behind Lugner, managing to land a slash, but Lugner simply uses his blood to repel Stark backwards, conjuring a massive blood hand to pin Stark to the ground. Lugner praises Stark for trying to fight him solo, but Stark reveals that Fern has been with them undetected, giving Fern to land a powerful spell onto Lugner. With Lugner confused as to how Fern avoided Liney's detection, Lugner demands to know what spell he was hit with, shocked to hear that Fern had learned the killing spell Zoltrak. Lugner reveals the ordinary Zoltrak spell shouldn't have damaged him so badly, but Fern ignores his stalling, preparing to finish off Lugner, but Liney steps up to fight. Stark reasons that they should get Graf some help first, both fleeing with Graf for now, but Lugner reveals that his blood is on Fern and Stark so they can chase them after he's healed up. Liney offers to hunt them down herself, but Lugner reveals that Fern's Zoltrak spell has been modified to a demon-killing spell, a modification of Zoltrak that specializes in slaying demons. Seeing Fern float in, Lugner remembers an elf by the name of Frieren, being the person that helped analyze the initial Zoltrak spell, but was also granted the title Frieren the Slayer for most demons slayed in all of history. As Frieren descends upon Aura and her army, Stark and Fern have managed to get Graf some help, grateful as he promises to pardon Frieren as Frieren was right to not trust the demons all along. Stark gets excited as Frieren can now roam through town freely. But Graf realizes that Frieren was the elf from the original hero party, disgraced to have imprisoned one of the saviors of his family's land. Greeting Aura, Frieren acknowledges that it's been 80 years since they last thought, asking if Aura would retreat now. Smirking, Aura has some of her men slash at Frieren, but Frieren nonchalantly dodges, noting that Aura has more puppets than before. Frieren notes how only powerful demons with enough magic can control an army, but Frieren does note how disgusting Aura's magic is, recognizing some of the suits of armor being controlled, declaring that she'll kill Aura once and for all. As Aura takes out her scale of obedience, we cut to Graf explaining the reason why Aura is one of the 7 sages of destruction, revealing that her scale allows Aura to weight her soul's mana capacity with another, and the soul with the greater mana capacity gains control of the other for eternity. Fern asks if there is a counter, but Graf does mention how the scale does judge fairly, so the only way is to have someone with greater mana capacity face Aura, but this hasn't been done in the past 500 years. Graf also reveals that souls with great wills can temporarily break the mind control, but Stark knows that it's a temporary solution, since Aura would simply get rid of those with strong wills to avoid any loose ends. As Frieren continues to dodge and evade Aura's army, Aura grows amused seeing Frieren dancing around, but Frieren enchants her staff, immediately freeing the men around her from Aura's curse. Shocked, Aura notes how Frieren must have used a lot of mana to break her curse, wondering why Frieren would use such a delicate tactic when Frieren can simply blast away the suits of armor. Frieren reveals that Himmel had scolded Frieren in the past for harming the cursed armors. Therefore, Frieren will make sure to wipe out Aura for good. At the same time, we hear the priest reassure everyone that the church they are in is protected by a strong barrier, giving Stark the chance to head out. Stark states that it won't be long before Lugner and Liney recover, and seeing as they are no match for the demons anyway, Stark states he'll go and seek Frieren's help. At first, Fern gets annoyed at how cowardly Stark sounds, but after some thought, Fern agrees to help evacuate everyone while Stark goes to get Frieren. On the town walls, Stark hands Fern Graf's amulet that'll help convince people to work with her. But when Fern feels bad seeing Stark all bloodied up, Fern suddenly realizes something, tossing her blood-stained coat over the wall. Detecting that someone else's blood is on Stark, Fern is suddenly pinned to a nearby wall by the Lugner's blood, all whilst Liney dashes in, conjuring an axe only to isolate Stark. As Stark demands to know how Liney moves like Eisen, Lugner apologizes for not killing Fern instantly, mocking Fern's grin as he states that demons can conceal their mana as well. Annoyed at how much Lugner is talking, Fern asks for Lugner to simply finish her off, but Lugner is more curious as to how strong Stark is, amused to hear that Stark is Eisen the hero's best student. Lugner also demands to know where Frieren is, not convinced to hear that Frieren simply fled town, knowing that Frieren wouldn't simply leave knowing there are still demons in town. As Lugner deduces that Frieren will be dealing with Aura, Fern suddenly calls for her staff, setting herself free, only to demand Lugner not move. Fern states that Lugner is arrogant, believing that no other human but Frieren is worthy of facing him. But when Fern states she'll blast a hole through Lugner's body, Lugner welcomes Fern to try. Flashing back, Fern and Frieren are seen finishing off some demons, making Fern ask how she compares to Frieren. Frieren states that Fern's mana and technique will never be able to reach Frieren's level since she has lived many years, but Frieren admits that Fern's cast speed surpasses her own. As Lugner turns around, Fern manages to fire off a spell, surprising Lugner, as he would have died if he didn't move first. Seeing as Lugner protected his heart, Fern deduces that a demon's heart is their weak point, spotting Lugner releasing an array of blood. Following Liney and Stark, Liney mentions how disappointing it is that Stark is already defeated, but gets excited seeing Stark refuse to stay down. Even though Lugner has greater control of his magic, each attack Lugner makes, Fern manages to evade and counter. Knowing that he's being overwhelmed, Lugner attempts to exhaust Fern's mana, but as Lugner notes how Fern is slowly chipping away at his defenses, Lugner orders Liney to finish off Stark and help him out. Liney gets annoyed at how passive Stark is, managing to land a deadly slash to Stark's eye, but Stark is more curious as to how Liney knows Eisen's moves. Liney reveals that she can copy any movement once she has seen it, replacing her axe with a sword, only to dash forward. With Stark continuing to defend, Liney once again exchanges her sword for a spear, tossing the spear towards Stark only to scare Stark when Liney barely scrapes Stark's neck with a dagger. Liney reveals that she recognized Stark's movements to be similar to the great hero Eisen, leaping over Stark only to cleave down with an axe. Since Liney is a perfect copy of Eisen, Stark knows he'll lose, failing to defend, only to be slammed into the ground. As Stark's body lays limp, Liney heads to assist Lugner, but Stark is still barely conscious, remembering his time training with Eisen. When Stark states that he'll never be as strong as Eisen says he agrees, but instructs Stark to continue to get up against strong warriors. That way Stark will never truly be defeated. With Stark forcing his body up, Liney advises Stark to stay down, but Stark states that he's still not done, remembering that Eisen's slashes were far stronger than Liney's. As Frieren and Lugner's magic erupt across the skies, Stark rushes Liney, leaving himself wide open for Liney to land a lethal blow to his stomach. When Liney fails to cut through Stark's tough body, Stark uses the chance to completely shred the left side of Liney's body. But realizing that Liney has been defeated, Lugner checks to see what happened, allowing Frieren to land the demon-killing spell on Lugner's heart. Flashing back, Frieren walks behind Flam, who asks if Frieren remembers the dying words of Basalt, reminding Frieren that demons' words only deceive, meaning people must use unfair tactics to ensure demons are erased. With Lugner accepting his own demise, he's at least happy to hear that Frieren is currently facing off against Aura, believing that since Frieren isn't with her hero party, Frieren will finally fall against Aura. Hearing this, Frieren states that Frieren will win, but not in an honorable way, surprising Lugner as he believes Frieren to be an honorable elf. Barely able to manipulate his blood, Lugner finds it weird that Frieren's mana output is so low compared to his, suddenly realizing the underhand tactics Frieren used to defeat Lugner. But Frieren doesn't waste time silencing Lugner. Cutting back, we see Flam stumble upon a ruined village, saddened to see that demons had raided the village and all that's left is Basalt the Throne's Shell, a once leader in the Demon King army. Spotting a single person alive in the village, Flam asks a younger Frieren if she was the one that slaughtered all the demons, amused to sense Frieren's overflowing mana capacity. Flam scolds Frieren for facing the demons head-on, reminding Frieren that she should fight with surprise attacks. But before Flam can leave, Frieren states that Flam and herself are pretty alike, able to sense that Flam has an even greater mana pool. Impressed, Flam begins carrying Frieren on her back, declaring that Frieren will be her apprentice moving forward. But Frieren refuses. Flam reminds Frieren that she'll probably die if she's left alone, suddenly sensing that they're being followed by even greater demons than Basalt. Flam notes how the demons concealed their mana, preparing for a sneak attack, but upon realizing that Frieren and Flam were mages, choose to pridefully reveal themselves. The demons order Flam to leave the elf behind, but seeing as she has no reason to refuse, Flam sets Frieren down, but reminds Frieren that the demons are very cocky and proud. In an instant, Flam lets out an explosion, completely wiping away the demons, shocking Frieren as Flam had concealed her true mana output, only to surprise and slay the demons with her true power. Flam admits that the tactic is quite frowned upon, but taking Frieren home, Flam is happy to see that Frieren is recovering quite quickly. Heading through a forest, Flam and Frieren both reveal that they despise demons, both losing their loved ones to demons, but they also both love magic. Flam suggests that only the two of them should become cowards when it comes to magic, instructing Frieren to first cut down her mana output to only 1/10, impressing Flam to see Frieren learn very fast. Flam says that they'll go over the basics first, instructing Frieren to continue to mislead demons for the rest of her life. Cutting back to Aura, who has realized that Lugner has been slain. Frieren utters that Aura has failed her mission, prompting Aura to settle for taking Frieren's life, unveiling her scale of obedience as Aura knows Frieren has drastically depleted her mana during battle. Frieren knows the scale will force the person with a lower mana capacity to bend to the will of the greater mana holder, commending Aura for exuding an overwhelming mana pool, having lived and trained for 500 years. Frieren does admit that it appears that Aura has the greater mana pool, but mentions how demons are incapable of suppressing their mana pool, flashing back to when Frieren had asked Flam why that is so. Flam states that demons are quite simple creatures, using human wealth to show status as a comparison, as demons use their mana output to show dominance over other demons. Flam does note how demons will temporarily conceal their mana to hide their intentions, but during battle demons have no reason but to flaunt their overwhelming mana, something Frieren knows she can use against the demons. Having been 3 years since they met, Flam is happy to see that Frieren had easily been able to conceal her magic consistently, But in a blink of an eye, another 50 years pass by. Having a private chat with Frieren, Flam is happy to have taught Frieren all she knew, wondering if one day Frieren may be able to slay the Demon King himself. Taking the chance, Flam asks that Frieren plant flowers around her grave, revealing it to be the spell her parents taught her, and is the reason Flam loves magic. With Frieren asking to learn the spell, Flam advises that Frieren remain hidden until she defeats the Demon King, prompting Frieren to uphold her promises when Flam passes away. Now alone, Frieren explores the continent, continuing to train her mana and live in secrecy, all whilst a nearby town develops nearby. One day, Himmel, Eisen, and Hyder visit the woods, running into Frieren, having heard that Frieren is a wise elf. But Frieren reassures the party that she is nothing special. Asking the party to leave, Frieren hears that Himmel believes the Frieren is far stronger than she is letting on, giving Frieren enough reason to begin adventuring with her new hero party. Having activated her scale, a dense ball of mana for both Frieren and Aura appear, prompting Frieren to ask if Aura is truly confident she'll win. Smirking, Aura recounts how Frieren had only been heard 80 years ago alongside the hero party, noting how Frieren's shameful mana output has remained the same since they last met. With Aura's mana ultimately tipping the scale in her favor, Aura prepares to sever Frieren's head, but suddenly notices that Frieren's mana is tipping the scale in her favor. Frieren takes the chance to point out how simple-minded Aura is, revealing that she had been concealing her mana all this time, shocking Aura as she calls Frieren's bluff. Frieren praises her master Flam for teaching her such a tactic, scaring Aura, as although Aura has lived for 500 years, Frieren has lived for over 1,000, finally unleashing her true monstrous mana output. Horrified to have been deceived, Aura ultimately is forced to yield to Frieren's commands, ordered to take her own life as Frieren leaves the scene. Returning by sunrise, Frieren prays for the fallen soldiers finally free, meeting up with Fern and Stark, happy to hear that Frieren has been excused of all crimes. As Graf thanks Frieren for preserving the bodies of the past heroes, Frieren explains that Himmel had instructed Frieren to treat the dead with respect. But Frieren also congratulates Fern and Stark for successfully defeating powerful demons. Graf asks for a burial for all the fallen, spotting a familiar pendant, grateful to Frieren for preserving what was left. As a reward, Graf agrees to reward Frieren with anything of her choosing, surprised to hear that Frieren simply wants the grimoire Flam, the mage, left behind detailing the town's barrier. Luckily, both Frieren and Graf agree that the grimoire is a fake, but Frieren could care less, prompting Graf to ask that Frieren be more casual around him. Frieren remembers a time when Himmel and Eisen were almost executed for speaking rudely to royalty, reminding Stark that Graf had threatened to execute him for speaking casually to Graf earlier, suddenly fainting at the sight of a lumberjack appearing. Luckily, Graf reassures everyone that he doesn't take offense to being addressed casually, reminding Frieren and her party that the town knows of their heroic feats and wants to celebrate their accomplishments. With Fern levitating Stark's unconscious body through town, the gang end up spending some time in town, rewarded and praised for their accomplishment, only to attend an official funeral for the fallen. Having spent enough time in town, Frieren and her party begin heading out, escorted by Graf himself, warning Frieren that their next destination with the Northern Plateau is quite dangerous. Graf asks if Frieren's party houses a first-class mage, a mage that has received a certification award from the Continental Magic Association, leading Fern to show off her third-class mage certificate. Fern asks why Frieren hasn't acquired her certificate yet, but Frieren states she's too lazy to constantly update her rank, especially since the association changes every few years. Frieren shows off her old holy emblem, but Graf suggests that Frieren visit Oberst in the Northern Lands, the largest magical city, to take the first-class exam. Graf says the gang can make it to the city if they head over the Schwer Mountains, wishing Frieren and her party the best for the future, and promising to never forget what Frieren did for their town. Heading towards the mountains, the three realize that it's beginning to snow, prompting Frieren to reveal that during the previous war with the Demon King, it was ultimately the cold winter conditions that claimed the most lives. Sadly, as the gang begin venturing on, they get lost in a snowstorm, leading Stark to faint in such poor conditions. Knowing that he'll be blown away with transportation magic, Fern is forced to drag Stark along, all heading towards an emergency shelter at the foot of the mountain. Relieved to see the shelter still standing, Frieren opens the door to a strange man exercising whilst half naked, terrifying Fern as she is afraid the man is a pervert. Defusing the situation, the man reveals that he too is an elf, having been 300 years since he saw one of his kind. Grateful that Fern started a fire, the man introduces himself as Kraft the monk, amazed to hear that Frieren is traveling to Oriole, also known as Heaven. Just then, Fern states that Stark's body is getting colder, cutting to Stark's perspective where he's dreaming of jumbo berry dessert, only to awaken to see Kraft sharing a bed with him. Terrified at first, Stark suddenly realizes how refined Kraft's body is, having never heard of Kraft before, but it's apparent that Kraft is quite skilled. Asking Stark to remain in the shelter, Kraft, Frieren, and Fern head out to retrieve Kraft's frozen supplies, grateful to have mages to help unfreeze his frozen carriage. Kraft takes the chance to learn more about Frieren, impressed to hear Frieren used to be in the hero party, but Frieren refuses to reveal any more about her past. Forced to wait out the storm, the four end up sharing meals and spending time together, cutting to 6 months later where the blistering cold winds have finally died down. Kraft is seen carving a pendant for Fern, happy to hear that Fern is religious as well. Frieren asks why Kraft believes the world has a god, especially since the god of creation hasn't shown herself ever, but Kraft says he used to be a non-believer as well. Sadly, when all the people that once knew Kraft had passed away, Kraft had left his faith in the hands of God, reminding Frieren that once someone passes away, their legacy will be sealed. Therefore, Kraft asks that Frieren open up about her past. That way he can pray for her. Flashing back, we see Himmel and Eisen playing with the orphans of a newly opened village. But off to the side, Frieren voices how surprised she was when she heard Hyder funded the reconstruction himself. Amused, Hyder reveals that he too was an orphan, asking to learn more about Frieren's past. That way he can pray for Frieren's future. Frieren sadly refuses to share anything, believing that her life has been very boring. But Hyder reveals that he knows Frieren has been concealing her mana permanently, something Hyder knows only exceptional mages are capable of. Hyder adds that he wants to learn more about Frieren, in case he has a mage daughter, putting a smile on Frieren's face as she tells Kraft that she already has someone that has prayed for her. Relieved to hear so, Kraft prays that Frieren reunite with her friends in heaven. Heading off as Kraft states that Frieren and himself will meet in the next few centuries, officially parting ways. Trudging through the piles of snow, Frieren ends up falling asleep, worrying Fern as she wonders if she should allow Stark to carry her precious master. In Frieren's dream, she remembers the time when herself and the hero party first set out, annoyed to have only received 10 copper coins to kickstart their adventure. Motivated to earn lots of money through their adventures, Himmel unsheaths his hero's blade, but sadly Hyder says the blade is a replica. Himmel had received the replica from saving a merchant, and decided to become a true hero when a young Hyder accused Himmel of only ever being a fake hero. With Himmel declaring that he'll one day acquire the real hero's sword, Frieren suddenly awakens from her dream, instructing Fern to head north towards a nearby village. Seeing as Frieren is still unable to walk, Fern soldiers on with Frieren on her back, refusing to allow Stark to carry Frieren. Seeing as the storm has died down, the gang makes it to the nearby village of the sword, greeted by the 49th village head, someone that is younger than expected. The chief mentions how unfortunate that a nearby cabin was destroyed, most likely due to the lord of the cabin, but Stark recognizes the village as the location that used to protect the hero's sword. Stark remembers that there was a sword that remained in a stone for centuries, up until Himmel himself drew the sword, a blade that would only accept a true hero. Heading to warm up in a nearby cabin, the chief cries that Frieren was meant to check on them every 50 years, but Frieren reasons that a checkup every 80 years would be fine as well. Seeing as the town is in dire need of monster extermination, the gang head out the next day, slaying some nearby snow beasts. Fern wonders why the village didn't hire any adventurers to help with the extermination, but Frieren utters that it's due to Himmel being the hero, prompting Stark to leap onto a pack of monsters gathered at the front of a cave, shocked to see what is inside. Before Stark can ask Frieren about what is in the cave, the Lord appears from the snow, squashing Stark, but Frieren realizes that the Lord has gotten weaker over the years. Before the Lord can attack Frieren, Stark appears, severing one of the creature's arms, prompting Fern to cast a barrier to protect Frieren from the creature's second claw. Pleased by her students' attacks, Frieren decimates the Lord with one single spell, fulfilling her duties. Heading over to Stark, Stark asks to know why the hero's sword is still in the stone, but Frieren reasons that the sword's aura is attracting the monsters, but the sword is protected by a powerful barrier. Seeing as Stark is more curious as to why the sword is still here, Frieren gets permission from the chief to tell the truth, revealing that Himmel actually failed to draw the sword from the stone. Even after failing, Himmel promised to slay the Demon King, fulfilling his promise and ultimately being deemed a true hero, even without the magical sword. Frieren wonders why people would lie about Himmel retrieving the sword, but Frieren reminds everyone that a hero doesn't need embarrassing stories following them around, allowing future generations to be inspired to grow. As everyone leaves the scene, Stark can't help but stare at the blade, suddenly remembering a flashback, only to bid the chief goodbye, promising to return in 50 years' time. Deciding to head to a more thriving village, Frieren gives everyone permission to do as they please after checking, leading Fern to invite Frieren to go shopping with her. But Frieren declines, wanting to spend the day reading her grimoire. Out of nowhere, Frieren suddenly remembers today is Stark's 18th birthday, shocking Fern as she hasn't thought of what present to get Stark. Curious as to if Frieren has prepared something for Stark, Frieren gleefully rushes towards her suitcase, unveiling a potion that dissolves clothing, an item that Frieren learned men would love. Annoyed, Fern dumps the potion all over Frieren, storming off at how disgusting Frieren's present was. But now left alone, Frieren wonders what present to get Stark now. Reaching for a ring, Frieren wonders if Stark is worthy of such an item, but instead retrieves a piece of paper with some writing. Following Fern, she decides to gather intel on Stark's likes and dislikes, but upon discovering that Stark is not in his room, Fern goes out in search of him. Asking around, Fern is surprised to hear Stark has already been helping out the villagers, locating Stark gazing out into the view. Relieved to see Stark is so mature, Fern slowly approaches Stark, but freezes upon hearing Stark admire the breast and turd-shaped clouds. Calling out to Stark, Fern glares at Stark for being so childish, but asks if Stark would like to go on a walk with her. Seeing Fern so quiet, Stark wonders what he may have done to upset her. But Fern begins panicking, wondering how she can find a gift for Stark without being suspicious. Not wanting to stress too much, Fern simply asks what Stark would like for his birthday, but gets irritated seeing Stark so confused as to why Fern is willing to get him a birthday present. Annoyed, Fern storms off, but is shocked to hear that Stark never received a present from Eisen nor his family, believing that they didn't care about him. Stark reveals that his family was a group of warriors, flashing back to when Stark's father scolded the village warriors for being so weak, asking them to be more like Stoltz, uninjured and cold-blooded. Stark's father reminds Stoltz that he's the strongest in the village, compared to Stark, who has no talent and hasn't even slayed a monster yet. Even though his father didn't want Stoltz around Stark, Stoltz chose to spend time and train Stark, revealing that when a demon attacked his village, Stark was the lone survivor, having fled when everyone else fought for their village. Stark wonders if Himmel would have stayed and fought till the very end, but Fern reassures Stark that he's a changed man, asking Stark to accompany her and pick a present for himself. Settling on a silver bracelet, the two return to Frieren, serving them massive hamburger steaks, something that pleases Stark as he wouldn't receive any gifts from Eisen, but would receive a hearty hamburger steak meal. Frieren takes the chance to reveal how awkward warriors are when it comes to expressing their emotions, mentioning how Eisen would serve everyone large hamburger steaks during people's birthday as a sign of respect for a warrior that has worked hard. Suddenly remembering that Stoltz would also cook him a hamburger steak during his younger years. Remembering the moment when Stoltz had instructed Stark to flee and live, realizing that his family truly cared for him. Tasting the hamburger steak, Stark thanks Frieren for the meal, curious as to what the potion Frieren is carrying, but Fern simply calls Stark a pervert. Several days later, we see Frieren chatting with a man, surprised to hear that Frieren is an adventurer, revealing that he too used to dream of becoming one. The man mentions how he had a friend who was fixated on living out an adventurous life. But as the man grew older, he slowly grew apart from his friend who continued down the adventurer path. The man admits that he regrets not joining his adventure friend 10 years ago. But when Frieren asks why the man is telling her his backstory, the man reveals that his village festival is coming up, but when the man went out to gather wood and pick some herbs, he wound up getting stuck in a bottomless swamp, begging Frieren to help. Contemplating if she should help save the man, Frieren fears that she'll get dirty in the process, But as Fern joins them, Frieren frees the man, escorting him back to his village. Grateful for the help, the man offers to guide Frieren and the gang around town, but Frieren says they need to head to a bigger town to restock supplies. Bidding farewell to the man warns the gang to beware of venomous creatures. But not even a few minutes later, Stark is unfortunately bitten by a venomous creature whilst trying to pick some fruits. Immediately bleeding from the nose, Frieren tries to identify the poison, but reveals that she doesn't have the priest's spell to do so. Seeing as Fern can't use her flying magic for too long, Frieren reasons that they'll head back to the small village, but Stark says he doesn't feel weak whatsoever. Frieren does admit that Eisen used to brush off various poisonous arrows all the time, but upon hearing that 20% of adventurers pass away due to poison, Frieren and Fern rush Stark to the nearby village. Having made it to a nearby church, the father of the church sadly reports that he can't save Stark, calling out to see if his brother could help. Revealed to be the man from earlier, Sane recognizes Frieren and her party, instantly curing Stark of his poison. Having returned the favor for rescuing him from Swamp earlier, Sane heads out to help out at the plaza, but Frieren is more curious than ever. Knowing that Sane's brother has been recognized as an outstanding priest by the royal capital and given a necklace to prove so, and even he couldn't cure Stark's poison, but for some reason Sane nonchalantly could. Sane's brother recognizes Sane to be a genius, revealing that he knows about Frieren, having been gifted the necklace by Hyder himself. Sane's brother notes how Sane's spark has left him ever since he became a priest, but wanting Sane to live a more fulfilling life. Sane's brother asks if Frieren would be willing to take Sane on their adventures. Having a team meeting, Stark is all for having a priest accompany them. But seeing as Frieren and Fern are hesitant on the idea, Stark takes matters into his own hands, heading to invite Sane to their party. Upon heading downstairs, Stark spots Sane indulging in some alcohol, smoking and gambling, wondering how corrupt Sane is. But Sane gets intrigued hearing Stark invite him on their adventures, agreeing to join Frieren's party if Stark can beat him at gambling. As Frieren enjoys her nap, Fern suddenly wakes Frieren up, having heard Stark cry for help, but as they rush outside, they spot a naked Stark along with a naked Sane, both robbed of their belongings by some elders in the village. Sane takes the chance to refuse Stark's offer to join Frieren's party, knowing that it's already too late for someone like him. But this reminds Frieren of the time when Himmel had asked Frieren to join their hero party. Having also refused the invitation, Frieren believed that she was scared of fighting the Demon King and had stopped slaying demons for 500 years. But remembering Himmel's words, Frieren reminds Sane that he still has the choice to change his future. With Sane still refusing to join, Frieren admits that she despises Sane, but that is also the reason why Frieren will be forcing Sane to join them. At the same time, Fern manages to retrieve the items from the elders, returning Stark and Sane's items, only to storm off. Having another meeting, Fern voices how disgusting it is that people gamble, but Frieren does admit that Sane has the chops to become an adventurer. Spending some more time in town, our trio helps set up for the Harvest Festival, spending more time with Sane, all whilst he thinks about how Frieren and her party really resemble his adventurer friend. Sane thinks about how his friend had promised to return 7 years ago, but as Frieren and her party ask Sane's brother for what may convince Sane to join them, Sane's brother does mention how Sane prefers older women. Spotting Sane nearby, Frieren reveals herself as an older woman, having lived over 1,000 years, but Sane states that Frieren's features don't attract him whatsoever. Having no choice, Frieren unveils her secret seduction technique, blowing a kiss for Sane, but Sane gets weirded out. Shocked to see that Fern and Stark had been seduced, they learn that Frieren's kiss had once knocked out Himmel, but having had enough, Sane states that he refuses to join their party. Frieren tries bringing up Sane's friend as a way to convince Sane, but Sane states that his friend is probably dead by now, having gone missing for 10 years already. Frieren tells Sane to travel and confirm if his friend is truly dead or not, advised to use the remaining time Sane has left to live. That way he won't have any more regrets. Sadly, Sane reveals the final reason he can't leave the village is because he doesn't want to leave his older brother. Sane mentions how he overheard his brother's conversation with Hyder, having been offered a position for Sane and his brother to move to the holy capital, but Sane's brother refuses, knowing how much the village their parents passed away means to them. Since Sane's brother refuses to leave the village, Sane states that he won't as well, but hearing how Sane truly feels, Sane's brother slaps Sane, reminding Sane to chase after his dreams and live a life with no regret. That evening, whilst our trio are fishing, Sane tells Frieren that he's patched things up with his brother, agreeing to go on an adventure and search for his friend. But this means that Sane will only accompany our trio for a fraction of their journey. With a final goodbye to his brother and his village, Sane agrees to live the rest of his life without regret, officially joining Frieren and her party on their journey. Having made it to the Rod region in the northern lands, the gang are amazed at the variety of stores in town, something that reminds Frieren of the hero party. Several minutes later, we see Fern and Stark bickering, leading Stark to storm out of the room, annoyed that Fern isn't listening to him. Wondering what all the commotion is about, Sane learns Fern is annoyed Stark didn't get her a birthday present, but Sane reveals that he too didn't get Fern a birthday present. Refusing to hear Sane's yapping, Fern begins kicking Sane, forcing Sane to promise to get Fern a gift. Before Sane leaves, he advises Fern to make things up with Stark, something Frieren agrees with. Heading out, Fern spots Stark admiring the bracelet she got him, but Fern is unable to approach Stark after what she did. At the same time, we see Sane eyeing a pouch with a butterfly, only for Fern to appear, complimenting Sane on knowing what she likes. When Sane asks if Fern has apologized to Stark, Fern admits that she couldn't, but Sane deduces that Fern doesn't hate Stark, but that she actually doesn't know how to speak with boys her age. When Sane asks Fern to pick a gift for herself, Fern refuses, making Sane smile as he chooses a pouch for Fern. Sane reminds Fern that Stark isn't the smartest person in the world, knowing that Stark helped Fern buy a present during Stark's birthday. Seeing Fern slowly realize she was in the wrong for lashing out earlier, Sane hands Fern her gift, advising Fern to go pick a gift with Stark for her birthday, and that Stark will only know how she feels if she tells Stark outright. Grateful for the advice, Fern starts by apologizing to Sane for kicking him earlier, only to head to Stark's location before sundown. Before Fern can say anything, Stark admits that he wanted to buy a gift with Fern since he didn't know what she would like, amusing Fern as she apologizes for being too harsh earlier. With both heading out to search for a gift together, we see Frieren spying on the two, caught by Sane, who is jealous that Stark and Fern can afford to argue. As the older people get older, they try to avoid conflict at all cost. Sane wonders how Frieren has been able to deal with the two kids up until now, but realizes that Frieren herself acts like a kid, revealing that Fern went to him for advice instead of Frieren herself. Frieren mentions how Fern was raised by Hyder, a priest just like Sane, but Sane refuses to be compared to such a great priest like Hyder. Frieren reassures Sane that Hyder was as corrupt as they come, always drinking, picky with his food, and even lying quite often. Surprised, Sane says he always saw Hyder as the ideal man, reminding Frieren of a deep conversation with Hyder. Frieren had asked why Hyder seemed different from his hero party days, learning that ever since Hyder had finished his younger years of life, he began pretending to be an ideal adult. That way younger people could depend on him, especially Fern. Hearing this, Frieren asks who Hyder can depend on then, but upon hearing that Hyder has always been depending on the goddess, Frieren offers to praise Hyder for the rest of his years, patting Hyder on the head. In the present, Frieren pats Sane on the head, praising Sane for his mature thinking, but Sane gets annoyed, all while Stark and Fern settle on a bracelet for Fern's birthday gift. Now in the banned woods, Frieren thanks the carriage driver for giving them a lift, learning that the driver is a merchant that owns an accessory store in the nearby town. Impressed by the merchant's sale tactics, Frieren suggests that Fern visit the store later, but suddenly spots the bracelet Stark bought for Fern, flustering Fern. Frieren utters that Himmel had once bought her a ring with a similar design, but upon digging up the ring, the carriage suddenly violently shakes, having been snatched up by a massive bird. The gang wonder how they should proceed, with Stark suggesting they take out the bird and Frieren levitate the carriage afterwards. Sadly, Frieren reveals that flying magic was only discovered 40 years ago, and that the humans had stolen the flying technique from demons, meaning most flying magic can only be briefly used on objects smaller than a human. Frieren suggests that she fly away with the merchant, Fern fly away with Sane, and Stark leap out of the carriage. But Stark reminds Frieren that he is a human, surprising Frieren as she remembers Eisen would easily tank any free falls. Fern suggests that they levitate the carriage right before it hits the ground, but seeing as the bird is preparing to slam the carriage into the ground, Frieren leaps outside, instantly slaying the creature. As the carriage begins to free fall, Frieren manages to save everyone, but everything is still damaged. Having healed the horse, the gang begin repairing the destroyed carriage the next day, but Frieren is more concerned that she lost her ring. Elsewhere, the trio begin preparing some food, wondering why it has gotten warmer recently, but Sane takes the chance empathizing with Stark for taking 3 hours to find a gift Fern would like. Although Fern can overhear the boys' conversations, she is happy that Stark is proud of the choice as well. But Sane reveals that the design on the bracelet is a mirrored lotus representing eternal love. Flustered, Stark apologizes for the weird gift, but Fern could care less, more annoyed at Sane for instigating things. As the gang continues spending time in the forest, they work together to repair the carriage whilst hunting and sharing meals together. At night, Frieren would spend time searching for her lost item, and by day the gang continue to repair the carriage. But one day, Fern asks why Frieren has been venturing off at night. Upon hearing that Frieren had lost the ring Himmel had given her, Fern joins the search, but Frieren says she doesn't want to waste time. Fern refuses to accept such a decision, mentioning how the lotus on the ring means eternal love, but Frieren doubts Himmel knew that when he gifted it to her. Upon telling the others about the lost ring, the merchant actually reveals that he has a spell for finding lost jewelry and accessories, as most people in town would often lose their valuables. Pleased, Frieren puts the spell to work, remembering the moment when Himmel had asked Frieren to pick out a gift for slaying the Demon King. Upon seeing that Frieren had chosen the lotus ring, Himmel smirks, getting down on one knee and placing the ring on Frieren's fingers. Having found the item, Frieren is relieved that she didn't give up on the search, but is more curious as to why Stark had given Fern a lotus-designed bracelet. Moving on to the Lob Hills, Fern is seen exhausted, collapsing onto Frieren, but this makes Sane wonder how long Fern and Frieren have known each other. Fern utters that it's been 4 years, and Stark adds that he's been with everyone for 1 year. But as the gang continue on their journey, Sane mentions how their party lacks something. Frieren says they have a frontliner, 2 mages, and a priest, making Fern suggest they need a thief to help deal with the mimic chest that Frieren keeps getting caught in. Sane suggests that they add a mature older lady, but as the gang enter the next village, they're all horrified to see everyone is unconscious. Inspecting the bodies, the gang confirm that everyone is simply asleep, something Frieren recognizes as a curse. Frieren explains that curses are spells cast by monsters and demons, with the most well-known ones being turning people into stone and putting them to sleep, magic that humans aren't able to unravel. Luckily, priests draw their magic from the goddess, and it's the role of the clergy to unravel such spells, meaning Sane may be able to identify and break said curse. As the gang gives Sane some room to assess the situation, Stark asks what's so special about magic from the goddess. Learning that the goddess's magic are recorded in holy scriptures, and just like demon magic, only the owners can read and interpret such magic. Additionally, those able to read and learn the goddess's magic are naturally blessed with protection from curses, making priests a natural counter to curses. Heading outside, Frieren admits that even magic is unable to detect curses, but just then Sane reports that he's detected the source of said curse, and that it'll be faster to defeat the monster inflicting said curse. Before the gang can head off, Stark is revealed to have been cursed and fallen asleep, prompting the gang to hurry. As they travel through the night, they levitate Stark's body with them, but as night falls, Fern ends up falling asleep as well. With no other choice, Frieren conceals the lovebirds with a barrier, leaving only Frieren and Sane alone. The deeper they venture into the forest, the more sleepy Frieren gets, asking Sane to wake her up when they encounter the monster, but Sane cries that he can only wake Frieren up for 5 seconds. Sensing the creature nearby, Sane has no choice but to carry Frieren with him, placing Frieren down as he finally comes face to face with a subspecies of the Chaos Flowers. Knowing that the monster is slowly draining the mana of its victims, Sane begins to evade the monster's advances, reciting that Chaos Flowers merge with local flora to exist and that their cores are their weaknesses. Taking out his book, Sane conjures several holy spears, aiming it at the core of the flower, but is surprised to see the monster had deflected the projectiles with its leaves. Wondering if he should awaken Frieren to help, Sane fears that 5 seconds won't be enough to explain the situation, fearing that if the flower deflected one of Frieren's powerful spells, the whole surrounding village would be wiped out. Just then Sane remembers Hyder's stories, telling Sane and his best friend that Hyder would always have trouble communicating with Frieren. But Hyder always trusted Frieren no matter what. Choosing to bet everything he can on these next 5 seconds, Sane breaks Frieren from the sleeping curse. But before Sane can explain the situation, Frieren instantly shoots down the monster with a single spell. The next morning, Stark awakens next to Fern, all heading back to the village, only to be praised for saving them. As the gang head off, Sane admits how amazing Frieren was, having known instantly what type of monster it was and how to defeat it. Frieren takes the chance to praise Sane for trusting her, finally making it to the halfway point of Vorik, where their next goal is Oberst. Out of nowhere, a noble appears, inspecting and praising Stark's body, only to take the four to his mansion. Recognizing the noble as Lord Orden, Frieren asks that Orden not do as he pleases, revealing that she knows the Orden family is one of the 3 great families in the Northern Land, and that Orden's grandfather was impulsive like Orden himself. Seeing as Orden is quite stubborn, Frieren attempts to leave, but upon hearing that they are low on funds, Frieren agrees to hear what Orden is offering. As they walk through the mansion, Orden asks where Stark is from, but upon hearing that Stark is a warrior from the Klee region, Orden reveals that his family originates from the same village. Showing a picture of his son, Wirt, Orden says that Stark looks exactly like Wirt, the heir and hero of the city. When Frieren asks to know what Orden wants, Orden reveals that his son had passed away whilst fighting a demon, giving his life to ensure the demon was defeated. Orden says only Gable the butler and a few others know of Wirt's death, and that he would like Stark to stall and keep up the town's morale as they rebuild their city's army. Orden states that there will be a party 3 months from today that he wants Stark to attend, offering to pay Frieren 10 straw gold coins and any grimoire of her choosing if Stark accepts. With no other choice, Gabriel begins teaching Stark the proper etiquette, all while Sane drinks out and the girls enjoy tasty snacks. One day, Fern spots Stark loitering around, exhausted from everything he has to remember, but caught off guard when Stark shows Fern what he's been practicing. With Fern weirded out, Stark heads to speak with Orden, wondering how Orden feels having only been 2 months since Wirt passed away. Orden mentions how he already planned a replacement, but Stark looks closer to Wirt, admitting that he doesn't like pretending that his son is still alive. Heading outside, Orden introduces Mutt, his second son and new future heir, someone Orden doesn't believe is as great as Wirt, reminding Stark of his own family dynamic. Given a wooden sword, Orden asks Stark to demonstrate his strikes, but upon seeing Stark shake profusely, Orden asks Stark to believe, reassuring Stark that he isn't so strict. Stark takes the chance to ask Orden how he feels about Mutt, happy to hear that although Orden is strict with Mutt, Orden still values Mutt, deeply believing that Mutt will one day surpass Orden himself. Elsewhere, Orden asks Fern to attend the party with Stark, immediately putting Fern to work, ultimately leading up to the big day. With Stark and Fern tired from the past 3 months, they both reason that they might as well show off their hard work, leading Stark to ask Fern to accompany him for a dance. At first, they start slow since Fern is quite nervous, but taking the lead, Stark guides and encourages Fern to be more confident, all while Sane and Frieren watch from the side. With the party over, Orden is seen removing his eye patch, wondering if Wirt was alive if it weren't for his injury. Seeing Stark appear, Orden orders Gable to give Frieren her rewards, praising Stark for being a great warrior. Before Orden can offer Stark to remain by his side, Stark refuses as Stark can't replace Orden's dead son and Orden can't replace Stark's dead father. Orden reveals that Wirt and himself had a fight during their last conversation, something Stark can relate to, as he too needs to apologize and return to Eisen before it's too late. Flashing back, we see Sane passing time by fishing, but is interrupted by his friend who drags Sane along to take photos with him, a memory Sane still thinks about. Now in the Klar region, Frieren tells everyone about a powerful dwarf in the upcoming village that has lived for over 400 years, amazing since dwarves normally live for only 300 years. Frieren says she refers to the dwarf as Old Man Volume 50, a rare instance of someone that can empathize with living for so long. But as the gang cross a small river, they spot the infamous village along with a sleeping warrior guarding the village. Revealed to be Volume 50, Stark feels bad for the old man, but Frieren calls Volume 50 out for pretending to be senile again. Out of nowhere, Stark is suddenly struck, falling onto his knees as Vols warns Stark to always be cautious of everything he sees, as Volume 50 could have easily taken off Stark's leg if he tried. With Volume 50 inviting everyone into the village, Frieren orders Stark to remain behind and train with Volume 50, given a tour by one of the villagers. As Fern and Sane help the villagers harvest some crops, the villager mentions how he's never seen Volume 50 so happy, believing him to be only a senile old man. But the villager does mention how Volume 50 chooses to protect and remain in the village all this time. With the gang spending some more time with Volume 50, a week passes by an instant, pleasing Frieren as Stark has improved quite a lot since training with Volume 50. Frieren reveals that Volume 50 was the reason Frieren chose to learn more about Himmel and the Hero Party, cutting to the past when Himmel had asked Volume 50 why he had stayed and protected the village for so long. Volume 50 mentions how his wife was a human and that he's simply protecting the village to retain any memory Volume 50 has of his wife, something Himmel finds admirable. Thanking Himmel for his kind words, Volume 50 promises to remember the Hero Party once they've defeated the Demon King and have passed away, but Himmel reassures Volume 50 that Frieren and Eisen will be the ones to continue their legacy even after passing. In the present, Volume 50 asks Frieren if she remembers the faces and voices of her Hero Party, but Frieren gets offended, stating Himmel is the reason she has begun to change. Hearing Volume 50 utter that he has forgotten his wife's face and voice, Frieren calls Volume 50 out for lying, mentioning how her party will be heading to Oriole near the Demon King's castle. Pleased, Volume 50 gets excited that Frieren is finally going off to defeat the Demon King. But this surprises Frieren as she wants to tell Volume 50 that the Demon King has already been defeated, but holds back. With a final farewell to Volume 50, the gang continue on their path, occasionally stopping so Sane can ask around for his friend. Stark is impressed that people still remember the name of Sane's friend, even after 10 years, having been called the Guerrilla Warrior. With a mere bridge separating the gang from reaching the magical city of Oberst, the gang choose to rest first at a nearby village, excited to hear that Gorilla Man did indeed help defeat a demon in the village, but only a stubborn old woman remembers where Gorilla Man did after. Upon visiting the older woman, the woman refuses to give the gang info on Gorilla Man for free, having the party run several errands, but the older woman agrees to give the gang their final task. Heading to some old statues, the woman mentions how she recognizes Sane, but upon seeing the old statues, the gang spot two forgotten heroes. Realizing one of them to be Kraft, Sane suddenly remembers a time when Hyder had shown the younger versions of Sane and Gorilla Man a similar statue, warning that everyone's legacy will eventually fade and be forgotten. From that moment on, Sane's friend had claimed the name of Gorilla Man and Sane the name Goatee Priest. Having helped clean up the statue, the old lady reveals that Gorilla Man also helped clean the statues a long time ago, always speaking highly of Sane. As the gang begin heading off, Frieren realizes Sane knows where his friend is, believing his friend is in the opposite direction of Oberst, making Sane struggle to decide what to do. Conflicted on what he should do, Sane reminds himself that he's on the journey to look for his friend, but seeing as they need more time, the gang spend the night in town. With Fern and Sane heading out to retrieve firewood and food, Fern and Stark share a moment when Fern teases Stark with her cold hands, but the gang get worried seeing snowfall. The next day, the town is consumed by a blizzard, meaning they won't be able to proceed with their adventure until the blizzard dies down. Luckily, Frieren knows that there is a magic store with a shady shopkeeper, mentioning there could be a possibility for legendary spells. Since they'll be staying in town for a month, Sane gets quite relieved, getting to share meals and spend time with Frieren and the others. With several days already passing by, Sane is seen drinking with one of the village elders, realizing that he's been spending time away from Frieren and the others. At that moment, Frieren appears, asking if Sane can mediate an argument between Fern and Stark. Upon checking up on the two, Sane and Frieren ask why Fern is angry with Stark, but seeing as they aren't getting anywhere, Sane chooses to speak with Stark privately. Stark reveals that he was simply paying Fern back for the time when she placed her cold hands on Stark's face, but when he did it to Fern, Fern got mad at him. Seeing as Stark and Fern are having another simple disagreement, Sane asks Stark to simply apologize and tell Fern what his true intentions were. Up next, Sane speaks with Fern privately, relieved to hear that Fern doesn't hate Stark for what he did, but was simply frightened when Stark held Fern in place with his strong hand. With the two lovebirds making up, Frieren and Sane share a meal, prompting Sane to ask why Frieren invited him on the journey in the first place. Frieren reveals that Sane reminded Frieren of herself before she met Himmel and the Hero Party, simply giving Sane a reason to adventure and live life. just like how Himmel gave Frieren a reason to live. Grateful for the memories, Sane bids farewell the next morning as he plans to search for his friend, surprising Stark and Fern since the farewell was quite short. As our trio make it to the Offen mountain ranges, where Stark is tasked with hunting and gathering. But one day Stark discovers that Fern has caught a fever. Calling on Frieren to cure Fern, Frieren realizes that Sane had left behind some medicinal herbs. Grateful as Frieren can identify the illness and cure Fern accordingly. Stark is surprised Frieren has a holy scripture of her own, identifying the illness as a simple cold and choosing to head to a nearby village to get out of the cold. Upon confirming that there is an icicle cherry blossom tree nearby, Frieren chooses to hold Fern's hand, mentioning how Fern feels safe when her hand is held while she is sick. Embarrassed, Fern turns away, prompting Frieren to tell Stark stories of when Fern was shorter than Frieren herself. After a long day of traveling and resting, the two make it to the base of the gorgeous cherry blossom tree, where the mushrooms at the base of the tree are their target. Stark wonders why Frieren chose to hold Fern's hand out of all things, but Frieren simply mentions how it's the only thing she knows how to do when supporting someone whilst they're sick. Flashing back, it turns out Himmel had once held Frieren's hand when she was sick, having learned it from his mother. Although Frieren thought it was strange, the thought of knowing Himmel was quite soothing when Frieren was sick, and hence Frieren promises to hold Stark's hand when he's ill as well. Upon retrieving the mushrooms, Frieren begins concocting a scary-looking mixture, feeding the medicine to Fern, all while Stark helps out in the village. Having made a full recovery, the gang thank the village for all the help, finally heading towards Oberst, the magic city. Finally laying eyes on the grand city, the trio reasoned that they should look for a carriage to cut down on time, prompting Fern to remind Frieren to take the first-class mage certificate if they want to enter the Northern Plateau. Frieren wonders why Fern doesn't take the first-class exam as well, but Fern gets discouraged since only a handful of powerful mages have ever achieved the first-class certificate. Fern wonders why a first-class mage must accompany parties traveling to the Northern Plateau, but Frieren reveals that in the past monsters like the Einsan would require a skilled mage and priest, but since a first-class mage is still required, it must mean something is happening in the Northern Plateau. Having hitched a ride, Frieren mentions how the exam comprises a combat test, wondering what strategy she should come up with to win. Fern is surprised, believing that even with Frieren's suppressed mana, she is still above average, so no strategy is needed. Frieren takes the chance to educate Fern, revealing that a mage's technique, experience, spells, control, effort, and tenacity will also play a role in the overall strength of a mage. Frieren adds that she's lost 11 times to mages with less mana than herself, these being 4 demons, one of which was Qual, 1 elf, and 6 humans. At the same time, we see a green-haired mage traveling by foot to Graf Franit's domain, stopping to take a break, only to run into some bandits. Before the bandits can attack the mage, Kraft appears, nonchalantly beating and scaring the bandits off. The mage thanks Kraft, introducing herself as Yubel the mage. But Kraft reveals that he wasn't here to save Yubel, but in fact he was protecting the bandits, having found the corpses of other bandits torn up by a powerful mage. As both part ways, Yubel mentions how she's heading to take the first-class exam, reminding Kraft of Frieren, who had planned to do the same thing. Now at the Magic Association in town, the receptionist tells Frieren that her exam is in 2 months and that first-class exams can be taken once every 3 years. Upon hearing that a 5th-class mage or higher certification is needed before taking the exam, Frieren attempts to flee, but Fern stops Frieren, reminding her that they need a first-class mage. Frieren states that they can simply hire a first-class mage or travel by sea, but Fern says that they don't have the finance to afford such a thing. Taking out her holy emblem, Frieren states that her emblem is too old, but out of nowhere an older gentleman asks to have a close look at Frieren's emblem, shocked at what he sees. That afternoon, Frieren is surprised someone recognized her holy emblem, flashing back to her time in the hero party when Frieren had shown off her emblem to the others. Sad to see that her party also doesn't know what the emblem symbolizes, but both the hero party and her current party remind Frieren that they have no doubt that Frieren is an incredible mage. Reading up on the regulations set by the Continental Magic Association, a proper mage is someone who achieves at least a 5th-class title, learning that Fern took a 3rd-class title, since it was the most available test at the time. Frieren reads that there are 600 mages with at least a 5th class title, but including apprentices from the 6th to the 9th class, there are 2,000 mages. Out of the bunch, there are 45 first-class mages, and first-class exams are held every 3 years either at Oberst or the Holy City of Strahl. Sadly, there have been no new first-class mages as of recently, and ever since the Demon King was defeated, mages have become quite rare. Since both girls will be taking the first-class exam, they both begin training, even spending time to celebrate Frieren's birthday, ultimately leading to the big day. Now in front of the exam proctor, the first-class mage Jeannot, amongst the examinees, the examiners make note of Werbel, a second-class mage and captain of the Northern Magic Corps. Next is Denkin, the second-class mage that had recently acquired an Imperial Mage, and finally is Fern, the youngest third-class mage with top marks. Looking around a bit more, the examiners also spot Ubbel, a third-class mage who failed her second-class exam and wound up slaying her first-class mage examiner. Additionally, the examiners notice Frieren's exuding potent mana, but just then Jeannot reveals that the 57 examinees will be split into groups of 3 for their first test. With everyone given a magic bracelet, Frieren realizes that the bracelet needs to be infused with magic, allowing her to see the glow of her party members' bracelets. With Frieren stumbling upon her rowdy party members, Fern is also coincidentally partying with Ubbel, all heading to the first testing grounds. Jeannot explains that small birds still live in the area, asking all parties to retrieve a still by sunset the next day and that everyone must be present. Upon hearing that parties can't leave the testing grounds, Frieren feels helpless spotting her 2 teammates fighting over the birdcage. Defusing the situation, Frieren introduces herself, learning her teammates are Lewine and Kin, the third-class mages. Kin mentions how Lewine and herself go way back, but they both admit they've never encountered a still before, all 3 reasoning they should all try to find a still first. With Kin and Lewine continuing to bicker and fight, Kin gets exhausted, forcing the girls to rest for a bit. Seeing as they're wasting time, Lewine suggests that she continues to search alone, learning that Lewine is stronger than Kin, but Lewine admits that she doesn't compare to Frieren. With Frieren advising that Lewine watch the skies, Frieren takes a breather, but Kin wonders why Frieren asked Lewine to watch the skies. Frieren wonders if Kin struggles to detect mana, but suddenly Lewine appears, reporting that she's found a still. Instantly, Kin attempts to trap the bird in a water barrier, but when the bird evades, Lewine manages to freeze the water, capturing the still. Although Frieren praises the girl's attempt, the still instantly disappears, dousing the girls with water as Frieren reveals that stills move faster than the speed of sound, suggesting that they continue to observe the bird before capturing it. Spending more time together, Kin and Lewine continue to argue, all failing to capture a single still, but they choose to set up camp as night falls. That night, Kin awakens to the sound of rain, noticing that Frieren is missing, only to go out in search of her. Having made it to a cliff, Kin wonders where the sound of rain is coming from, but is suddenly attacked by a monster. Pinned down and without her staff, Kin cries for Lewine, but out of nowhere Frieren binds the creature, reminding Kin to watch the skies. Giving Kin time to calm down, Frieren wonders why Kin and Lewine work well together even though they hate each other. Kin reveals that she is quite a coward, remembering a time when Lewine had stayed back to help Kin learn how to fly, even giving Kin several compliments to cheer her on. After Kin still refused to fly, Lewine kicked Kin off the cliff, impressed that Kin learned to fly when it mattered the most. Frieren is happy to hear that Kin and Lewine appreciate each other after all, but is more intrigued to hear that Kin has come up with a plan to capture the still. Returning to the campsite, Frieren sits watch as the girls sleep, remembering a time when Eisen was shaking in fear, knowing that their hero party needed to face a dragon. Himmel apologizes as he thought an inspirational speech would help Eisen out, but when Himmel admitted that he was scared as well, Eisen thanked Himmel for being honest. Knowing that the dynamics for parties differ from case to case, Frieren heads out, but at the same time we see that Fern's party had managed to capture a still for themselves. Seeing Fern relaxed, Fern's members remind Fern that other parties can still steal their still, asking that Fern prepare to fight other mages. The next morning, Frieren and her party go over what they know about the still. First, the creatures travel faster than the speed of sound. Next, the bird can break out of any normal restraints. Additionally, the creatures can detect mana and flee upon sensing danger. Lewine points out that they won't be able to detect the creature, since the stills don't have any mana, but Frieren points out how she was experimenting with a spell that could capture the creature. Frieren reveals the spell to be developed to specifically hunt down birds, the exact same spell Frieren used to bind the monster that attacked Ken last night. Lawine wonders why Frieren didn't mention the spell earlier, but Frieren reveals that the spell can only be cast 50 centimeters within range of the target, and unfortunately the closest they've gotten to a still is 3 meters. Frieren asks if the girls can possibly stop the bird with their magic, prompting both girls to suggest that their freezing and water spells could possibly temporarily restrain the bird, but it would be tough to get close without it sensing their mana. Suddenly realizing something, Frieren tells the girls her idea, intriguing the girls as they may have to fight with the other parties, but they commit since it's their only option. At the same time, Fern, Yubel, and Land all choose to hide in a cave, but upon running out of water, they all decide to replenish their water. But Yubel suddenly realizes that the ground they're walking on used to be a riverbed. Fern asks how powerful the barrier is, wondering if the barrier stopped the flow of water into the testing area, but Land points out that there is still a source of water in the middle of the valley. Additionally, since the still won't survive without water, Fern's party agrees to search for smaller ponds nearby, but upon spotting a magic projectile nearby, Fern instantly conjures a barrier to defend. Unable to spot their foes, Fern continues to defend, all whilst Yubel fends off Warble's advances. Land faces Sharf, and Fern faces Air. Warble takes the chance to praise Fern for reacting to his spell, but before the two parties can initiate their duel, a massive beam of light suddenly consumes the central lake. Revealed to be Lawine is seen freezing the entire lake, confusing the other parties as they fail to unfreeze the lake. Having witnessed Lawine's magnificent spell, Dinkin reasoned that no still would come to the lake again, advising his team members, Richter and Laufen, to follow after Frieren and her party, planning on stealing their still. As Frieren and her party set their plan into motion, Fern and Warble's party begin clashing, all agreeing to separate for now. Assessing the situation, Dinkin scolds the mages for wasting their magic, attempting to unfreeze the lake, but also doesn't recommend mages search for other waterholes whilst in the air, as they will be vulnerable to monsters. Turning and heading after Frieren's party, Dinkin runs into the party they saw earlier, having been slaughtered and taken prey by the monsters. When Laufen suggests that they at least bury the corpses of their fellow mages, Dinkin forbids it, revealing that the Geisel monsters hunt based of their prey's mana, and since the corpses still have mana, the Giselle will lock onto them if they move the bodies. Laufen wonders how sadistic the examiners are for not caring about the lives of the test takers, but Richter states that the Continental Magic Association simply wants to keep a certain standard for those who manage to become a first-class mage. Dinkin voices how he despises the association's old way of thinking, having seen mages greater than himself fail to achieve anything noteworthy, but just then Dinkin spots a suspicious body of water. Upon further inspection, Dinkin manages to detect a faint scent of mana infused in the water, believing it to belong to Frieren and her party, and as a result of the mana in the water, the stills won't come near this body of water. Dinkin deduces that Frieren and her party plan on infusing all watering holes with mana, forcing the still to rally at their desired body of water. But seeing as there is no way of finding which body of water Frieren and her party are at, Dinkin suggests that they all rest for now. At the same time, Ken is seen reporting that she's infused as many bodies of water with her mana, all deciding to wait in their current positions for Estelle. Seeing as they now need to wait, Frieren suppresses her mana even further, knowing that she mustn't move or else feints of mana will be released. As Can and Lawine hide nearby, Frieren watches as various creatures drink from the intended water source, but upon spotting a still land on her shoulder, Frieren successfully captures a still. In that instant, Dinkin manages to detect Frieren's spell, sending Laufen to keep Frieren occupied. At the same time, Land faces Sharf, all whilst Fern faces Air. Shocked to see Fern is able to defend against all of her attacks and only uses basic attack and defense spells. Curious, Air gets weirded out, sensing a strange confidence exuding from Fern, but Air does feel bad for Yubel, declaring that she'll be slaughtered having to face off against Warble. Fern calls R's bluff, revealing that she knows R is far stronger than Warble himself. But not denying it, Air states that Warble's experience in battle is unmatched. Cutting to Warble and Yubel's duel, Warble is forced to go on the defense, unable to detect Yubel's slashing attacks. Pausing for a moment, Yubel mentions how she may have overdid her attacks, but Warble deduces that Yubel's slashing attack has a 5-meter range, declaring that they should fight until the end. Back with Fern, she chooses to simultaneously fire hundreds of projectiles, testing how long air can keep her barrier up, but after a few seconds, Fern's lands a strike. With Warble revealing his trump card, Warble is able to seal away Yubel's mana, forcing her onto her knees as she realizes that Warble could have easily binded and slayed her during their initial encounter. Warble reveals that simply looking at Yubel will bind her, so he gives Yubel the chance to leave behind the still and flee. But suddenly realizing something, Yubel tosses the still into the air, leaping forward only to barely miss a slash on Warble's eyes. Yubel deduces that Warble needs to have view of the entire target's body, but rebinding Yubel, Warble realizes that Yubel is quite the sick person, having wanted to torture Warble by removing his eyes instead of cleanly severing off his head. With no other choice, Warble prepares to slay Yubel here and now, but is intrigued hearing Yubel asking if Warble has ever slayed a child or mother. Playing along, Warble reveals that wars from where he comes from are quite messed up, as it wasn't too uncommon for children and mothers to be sent to war. Taking some more time, Yubel realizes that Warble's binding spell is a reflection of himself, not wanting to take another's life. But before Warble can silence Yubel for good, Fern appears, ordering Warble to not move. Shocked, Warble notes how he couldn't sense Fern at all, deducing that Fern was the one to have captured the still for her party. Yubel notes how Warble also had a binding spell, but was just unlucky to have not stumbled across a still for himself. Demanding to know where Air is, Warble is shocked to learn that Fern killed her, giving up his party's need to capture and still and finish the exam with all their members. Unbinding Yubel, Warble heads off, allowing Yubel to praise Fern for lying. Cutting to Land and Sharf, Sharf manages to weave through Land's barrier, landing a fatal blow on Land's dominant arm. Land admits that Sharf's ability to turn petals into metal is an amazing spell, but Land has already identified the spell's weakness, pissing Sharf off as he demands Land surrender. Scolding Sharf for not being able to detect mana, Land appears behind Sharf, revealed to have used cloning magic the moment the test began. Knocking Sharf out, we cut to Warble, who is relieved to see that Air is still alive, only knocked out due to mana exhaustion. Warble learns that Fern used basic offensive magic to defeat a prodigy like Air, terrified to imagine what type of monster Fern will be in the future. As Warble carries Air on his back, they head to Sharf's location, forcing Warble to levitate Sharf as they all hear rain hitting the outside of the dome. Air and Sharf apologize for losing, since now their party will fail, but Air takes the chance to thank Warble for saving her village from a demon in the past. Warble corrects Air, as he had begun slaying demons in the northern land for a girl he liked 29 years ago, hoping she would return, but Warble had already forgotten what she looked like. With Warble and his party making plans on heading home after the exam, Air offers to introduce Warble to her grandpa, who is a first-class mage, but suddenly Air points out a still in the trees. Instantly, Warble binds and captures the bird, grateful that his luck has finally turned around. At the same time, we spot Frieren and her party glaring at Laufen, all whilst Denkin observes Frieren from afar. In a blink of an eye, Laufen disappears, having stolen the still right from Frieren's palms, intriguing Frieren. Elsewhere, we see Examiner Sense scolding Jeannot for allowing so many promising mages to die, but Jeannot reminds Sense that only the most elite should be allowed the title of a first-class mage. Sense mentions how the test revolves solely on luck, but Jeannot reminds Sense that luck is a skill as well, believing that in the remaining 3 hours for the test, things should get real interesting. Sense wonders who Jeannot thinks will pass the exam, annoyed to hear that Jeannot believes Denkin will pass, since Denkin only cares about power and money. Back with Frieren, we see Denkin and Richter reveal themselves, surprising Frieren as Laufen's Jilwer spell would have allowed her to move at a high speed, meaning no further intervention was needed. Unfortunately, Denkin admits that Frieren would have easily been able to track down Laufen's pathing, revealing that he knows Frieren is the elf from the famous hero party. Richter states that he plans to kill one of Frieren's party members, but before Richter can cast anything, Denkin orders Richter to stand down. Surprised, Richter wonders why a cold Imperial mage like Denkin would be so reserved to killing, but Frieren and Denkin both agree that the title of first-class mage isn't worth taking another's life. Pissed, Richter reminds everyone that more than 50 years ago, the founder of the Continental Magic Association, Ciri appeared, promising to give anyone with the title of first-class mage any spell of their choosing. People have since then regarded Ciri as the closest thing to the goddess themselves. Therefore, mages must do whatever they need in order to obtain the title of first-class mage, if they want their wish granted by Ciri. Hearing Richter once again declare that he'll slay one of the girls, Denkin orders Richter to only place their enemies to sleep, prompting Richter to separate both parties with an earth spell, allowing Denkin and Frieren to face each other. Flashing back, we see Flam take Frieren to meet with her master, Ciri. As Flam and Frieren kneel before Ciri, Ciri is impressed by her student as Flam has brought a powerful elf as a disciple, offering to grant Frieren any spell of her wish. Sadly, Frieren refuses, stating that she finds joy in searching for the spell, disappointed that Frieren lacks the ambition to fight. Correcting Ciri, Flam states that Frieren will ultimately be the one to slay the Demon King, confusing Ciri as she reminds Flam she is capable of such things as well. Flam adds that Ciri yearns for a good battle, but Frieren yearns for peace. In the present, Richter slowly begins to march towards Can and Lawine, but when Lawine attempts to freeze Richter, Richter simply continues marching. Firing several icicles, Richter simply blocks the projectiles with an earth wall, sending pillars shooting from the ground towards Lawine, but can steps in to block the spells. Having seen enough, Richter confirms that Lawine controls weak ice magic, and Ken is useless without water nearby, annoyed that he is facing such weak opponents. As the girls evade Richter's advances, Lawine reminds Richter that he's exhausting his mana with such flashy attacks, but Richter asks if the girls are too focused on defending. Richter states that a mage's barrier is quite effective, but it hasn't improved over the years since a complex defensive spell would be useless during battle. Crouching down, Richter suddenly conjures a rock pillar, too strong for Can to block, ultimately knocking the girls down. Before Richter can leave, he's disappointed to see the girls refusing to give up, amused to hear Lawine state the human body is filled with water. Richter reminds the girls that mages must first be able to picture the spell they're casting first. And even if the girls manage to grasp the complexity of the human body, Richter's mana will protect him from any of the girls' magic. Admitting that they were simply bluffing, Lawine does point out how Richter is also scared of something, realizing that Richter had purposely moved them away from any bodies of water for Can to use. At the same time, Denkin and Frieren effortlessly exchange attacks, but as the fight draws on, Denkin admits that his mana will be depleted before Frieren's. Choosing to end the battle quickly, Denkin encases Frieren with a tornado, igniting the tornado which catches the attention of the examiners. The examiners state that the barrier created for the exam was made by Ciri herself, but they do find it weird how someone was analyzing the barrier recently. At the same time, Frieren appears from Denkin's spell unharmed, forcing Denkin to barrage Frieren with several light projectiles. Out of nowhere, Denkin is forced to defend against a stray projectile, amazed that Frieren both defended and fired off a shot of her own. Having closed the gap, Frieren rushes Denkin with a spell, ultimately defeating Denkin, who has exhausted his mana. Approaching Denkin, Frieren demands to know where Lawfen and the Still are, but Denkin refuses to disclose anything. With no choice, Frieren flips Denkin over, stating that she knows Lawfen is nearby, threatening to slay Denkin if Lawfen refuses to give up. Denkin orders Lawfen to stay hidden, but seeing Frieren prepare to harm Denkin, Lawfen blinks to save Denkin only for Frieren to intercept and capture the two. Taking back the Still, Frieren ties the two up, but Lawfen takes the chance to ask why a wealthy, well-off man like Denkin is so fixated on becoming a first-class mage. Denkin utters that his homeland is within the northern plateau, and he's simply meant to visit a grave in his homeland. Denkin asks if Frieren will need to help the girls, warning Frieren about Richter's sporadic nature, but Frieren mentions how she's finished analyzing the barrier. With Richter confirming that Denkin lost to Frieren, he turns his sights back onto the girls, this time unleashing powerful earth magic dead set on slaying Can and Lawine. At that moment, Frieren unveils the spell she's been working on, blasting a beam into Ciri's barrier. Smirking, Jeannot is confident that Ciri's barrier will hold, but in mere seconds the barrier shatters before the examiner's eyes. Asking for intel on Frieren, Jeannot confirms that Frieren is one of the last great mages, something Ciri herself agrees with as she senses Frieren's presence. Dinkin asks why Frieren would destroy the barrier, but Frieren simply states that fighting a water mage in the rain would be quite tough. Cutting over to Richter, he begins to hesitate, rushing to finish off the girls, but this leaves him open to be trapped by Lowine's ice magic. Unable to move, Richter watches as Ken conjures a massive ball of water, overwhelming Richter with a surge of water which defeats him. Heading over to the girls, Frieren utters that they have 2 hours remaining, praising both girls with headpats for their hard work. Having washed up beside Dinkin and Laufen, Richter admits that his mana is depleted as well, but with on other choice Dinkin's party continues on, refusing to give up. Following Fern and her party, Yubel is weirded out to learn Fern only uses basic spells to fight, intrigued at who Fern's master is to have been able to destroy the barrier around them. When Fern begins telling her party about various spells she has, Land reminds Fern that they'll be possible enemies in the future, advising Fern to hold on to her secrets. Back with Dinkin's party, they run into another party that has managed to capture a still, but are clearly exhausted having lost one of their teammates during the process. Choosing to fight with honor, Dinkin and Richter confront the party with bare fist, cutting to the end of the exam, where 6 parties remain with 18 mages passing the first round. The examiners announce that the next exam will be held in 3 days, all while Stark enjoys his peaceful time alone. The next day, Stark is seen lounging around in bed, suddenly hearing a knock at the door. Upon realizing it's Fern and Frieren, Stark is immediately interrogated for slacking, all 3 heading out into town to hopefully cheer Fern up. Frieren suggests an expensive store she visited with Himmel in the past, but we cut to Richter, who has helped his grandma repair a broken lamp. As a reward, his grandma rewards Richter with a light snack, but as his grandma heads off, Richter runs into Dinkin and Laufen. Seeing as they've run into each other, Dinkin suggests that they eat out together, but Richter simply refuses. Beginning to close up shop, Richter overhears that Dinkin's deceased wife used to share a meal with him at a famous restaurant in town, forcing Richter to agree to join Dinkin for a meal. That night, Land is seen walking through town, stumbling onto a lost kitten, only to spot it reunite with its mother. Out of nowhere, Ubble appears, asking for a quick chat, something Land gladly accepts. Land takes the chance to ask why Yubel didn't slay Werble when she had the chance, impressing Yubel as Land was observing her fight. Yubel mentions how when she heard Werble's past, she began empathizing with Werble, suddenly casting Werble's binding spell. Unable to move, Land hears that Yubel is able to copy any spell she's seen as long as she places herself in the shoes of the mage. Yubel praises Land for having such perfect clones, wondering what type of life Land lived before they met. But Land refuses to disclose anything, disgusted by mages like Yubel who operate based on feeling instead of theory. Still curious about Land, Yubel releases her bind, tagging along to wherever Land is going. At the same time, Dinkin shows Richter and Laufen the restaurant he used to visit often with his wife, a restaurant Richter recognizes as the most expensive one in town. Regardless, Dinkin and his gang head in, spotting Frieren and her party, but seeing as they're enjoying themselves, Dinkin chooses to not disturb them. As Frieren, Stark and Fern choose their own meals, Frieren remembers back to when the hero party had returned a stolen knife to Lecker, the chef of the restaurant. Lecker had promised to serve the hero party all throughout the night, even promising to keep the restaurant open for the next 100 years, something Himmel had wished for. In the present, Frieren indulges on the same meal she had many years ago, disappointed that the flavor isn't the same, but regardless, it's still delicious. With Frieren's party, Dinkin's party, and even Land and Yubel dining in the same restaurant, they all head off for the night, cutting to the next morning when Stark is spending time with an old man. Coming to fetch Stark, Frieren learns that Stark randomly met the old man when he was training, but regardless, Frieren asks for Stark's help. Back in the inn, Fern is seen giving Frieren the silent treatment, annoyed that Frieren had overslept and forgot to buy groceries. Seeing as Frieren isn't able to resolve things with Fern, Stark tries to talk things over with Fern, but only hears that Fern wants snacks before they can talk. Elsewhere, we follow Ken waiting for someone, suddenly spotting Werble and Scharf heading through town, suddenly stopping in front of a man only to declare the man is not fit to be a warrior. Just then, Lawine appears, apologizing for her dazzling outfit since her brothers along with her mother had chosen to spoil her with some gifts. Seeing the opportunity, Ken chooses to tease Lawine, but instead gets punished for doing so. Back with Frieren, she along with Stark attempts to buy snacks for Fern, suddenly running into Lewine and Ken, who join them on their shopping spree. Happy to hear that Frieren made more friends during the exam, Stark is suddenly stopped by Werble, glad to finally run into a competent warrior. Weird out, Stark is recruited by Werble to slay a monster, but seeing as Fern and Frieren aren't against such a thing, Werble drags Stark along with him. Back at the inn, Ken and Lewine give Frieren something, thanking Frieren for helping them pass the first exam. But this makes Frieren remember a chat she had with Himmel. Having saved a little girl from a monster, Frieren wondered why Himmel continues to help people, surprised to hear that Himmel wants to be remembered even if it means risking his life to save others. Advised to be remembered herself, Frieren chooses to spend time with the girls, sharing stories together. But before they can wrap up, a message is delivered to them. Reading over the examiner's name, Lewine recognizes Sense as the examiner who failed everyone in the past, all whilst all the other examinees are also notified of the upcoming exam. Meeting at the ruins of the King Tomb, Sense takes the stage, reassuring everyone that her exam is quite simple. Sense states that in order to pass, examinees must raid the dungeon and pass all the floors, and Sense is willing to pass everyone that reaches the bottom floor. Speaking up, a mage points out how the ruins have never been conquered before, but Sense reminds everyone that mages should be able to do the impossible. Sense will also be following the examinees to track who completed the dungeon task, but for safety Sense hands everyone a bottle with an escape golem. The golem is meant to help rescue anyone who shatters the bottle, but the golems will also shatter at dawn the next day, setting an official time. Just like that, Sense begins the exam, prompting everyone to split into groups, discussing ways to tackle the dungeon. Recognizing the general structure of the dungeon, Dinkin points out that there are multiple entrances, but they all should lead to the deepest floor. Out of nowhere, another mage wonders why everyone is working together, reminding everyone that there may be betrayal at any point. As that sole mage heads in first, the other parties begin heading into the dungeon as well, but as Frieren and Fern choose an entrance, Sense chooses to accompany Frieren's group, believing they'll clear the dungeon the fastest. With the three making their way through the dungeon, they begin tracking their route, but with Frieren's expertise, she even warns Sense to not step on any traps. Fern is amazed at how efficient Frieren is, but Frieren reveals that she learned a lot whilst exploring with Himmel, since he loved exploring dungeons. Flashing back, the hero party is seen exploring a dungeon, but before they proceed to the next floor, Himmel decides that he wants to finish exploring their current floor before descending. Annoyed, the hero party wonders what Himmel is thinking, but Himmel points out that exploring is part of the adventure, and if they don't make the most of it, their adventure will be finished before they're satisfied. Back outside, we see Ken and Lewine finally heading into the dungeon, leaving Dinkin, Richter, Laufen, and two others. Annoyed, Dinkin states that they could have easily cleared the dungeon if everyone worked together, but Richter reminds Dinkin that not all mages are as logical as Dinkin. With no other choice, Dinkin and his party finally head in, cutting back to Frieren to seem to be fixated on a mysterious chest. Even after confirming that the chest is a mimic, Frieren refuses to give up, ultimately caught by the mimic chest. Attempting to set Frieren free, Sense is weirded out, seeing Frieren's weird obsessions with chest. Elsewhere, Dinkin and his party identify a trap, carefully walking around it as they spot the stain of a corpse nearby. Reaching a gate, Dinkin attempts to break the doors open, but accidentally triggers several gargoyle statues to spawn. Reacting quickly, Dinkin blocks and fires off a shot, tearing away at one of the monsters. But seeing a second gargoyle sneak up, Method swiftly erects a barrier to halt its attack, all whilst firing off a counterbeam. At the same time, Laufen slams the second monster into the ground, but the creature fires a beam that blasts Lang into a separate room, triggering a spike trap. Having had enough, Denekin sweeps up the gargoyles with a torrential tornado, smashing the monsters into pieces, only to check up on Lang. Seeing as Lang is trapped with no way of escape, Dinkin orders Lang to break her bottle, successfully surviving with the golem getting her to safety. Back with Frieren, she manages to escape with Fern's help, explaining that she would normally blow the mimics up from the inside, but that would ruin her hair. Venturing deeper, the girls run into a gate guarded by gargoyles, deciding to blow them up before they are woken up. Continuing to collect valuable items, Frieren chooses to explore each level to the fullest, eventually stopping to check on the loot they've acquired. Having a small chat, Sense wonders why a powerful mage like Frieren exudes no determination. But Frieren says she only ever wanted to make Hyder proud and has lost passion for anything ever since. Sense asks why Frieren is trying to be a first-class mage then, making Frieren admit that she treasured the time she spends with Frieren, simply happy to follow Frieren whenever they go. Following Werbel and his party, the three stumble onto a strange-looking room, suddenly noticing that air has been binded. Air manages to detect three mages nearby, prompting Werbel to block an incoming beam, all while Scharf blocks the enemy's view. With air free, Werbel confirms that there are stone clones of them, assigning each person to fight another. At the same time, Dinkin's group runs into a clone of Laufen, but with the gang working together, they manage to dispatch the clone, shocked at how perfect of a copy it was. Passing through into another room, the five are immediately weary of their next opponent, watching as a carbon copy of Frieren floats down towards them. Following Janot, he goes over the Spiegel with his colleague, rehashing that such a fiend is a mythical creature able to use the memories of people in its dungeon to create perfect copies. Unlike the Einsam, the clones created are equally strong as the original, meaning Sense chose this test for the mages to test the examinee's ability to self-analyze and teamwork. Back with Dinkin's team, Dinkin and the others are forced to look for cover, horrified by Frieren's clone's monstrous attacks. Elsewhere, Jubel and Land seem to be trapped, with Land severely injured. Just around the corner, Ubbel's clone admires one of the bottles, making Jubel curious as to how perfect of a copy her clone truly is. Land seems like he doesn't want to chat but gives in, noticing that the clones can't speak. During their initial encounter, Jubel's clone dashed straight for Land's golem bottle, ignoring Land entirely, something Jubel admits she would have done as well. Land finds it messed up that the clone has cornered them, but chooses to wait. Something Jubel points out is because of her binding spell, or because the clone enjoys the torturing. Seeing as Land is beginning to bleed out, Jubel asks if Land is the real one. But upon hearing that Land isn't sure himself, Jubel hands Land her bottle. Surprised, Land refuses since Jubel needs it for herself. But seeing as there is no other option, Jubel prepares to retrieve Land's bottle. In an instant, Jubel bolts around the corner, rushing in close to prevent the clone from binding her. But with each exchange, the two are evenly matched. Knowing that the final decider will be down to luck, Jubel relentlessly charges forward, but sadly Jubel falls victim to her own binding spell. Before Jubel is slain, Land appears behind the clone, allowing Jubel to free herself and finish off the clone. But upon retrieving the bottle, Jubel confirms that the Land following her all along was a clone. Land wonders why Jubel would risk her life, but Jubel points out that she has learned that Land refuses to sacrifice a life for his own, having used Land's refusal of her bottle as proof. Back with Frieren's group, Frieren points the gang towards a set of stairs, but finding something weird about one of the walls, Frieren declares that they're in front of a hidden entrance. When Frieren pulls out the map to check for any hidden passages, Frieren stumbles onto a button, turning it only to have the walls magically open, revealing a hidden set of stairs. Heading up the stairs, Frieren and the gang are amazed to have stumbled into a nicely preserved room filled with descriptions of the former king, something Frieren finds fascinating. Satisfied, the gang finally head to the next floor, stumbling upon Dinkin and his party outside. Finding it weird that everyone is waiting outside a room, Frieren confirms that her clone is preventing mages from passing. Seeing as the clone has all of Frieren's strength, Richter suggests they hypnotize or use binding magic, but Frieren states that she is immune to both. Dinkin suggests that they try both, in hopes to give an opening for Frieren to strike down her own clone. Calling for Method to analyze Frieren, Frieren can't help but get jealous seeing Method hug Frieren. Method states that Frieren is indeed immune to both hypnosis and all of her restraints, but a well-versed hypnotist may still break through, wondering if clones have the minds to be controlled. Suggesting that Edel is the hypnotist they need, Method stresses that Edel may not even make it to where they are, cutting over to Edel's group, who seems to be hiding from Sense's clone. Edel, Blay, and Dunce note how most modern magic isn't suited for dungeons, since controlling objects is easier than creating them. Sensing several layers of magic on the clone's hair, Edel praises Sense for being able to individually control each strand of a hair, something only the greatest of mages can do. Having already chosen to give up, Edel is asked if she could hypnotize the clone with her voice, but Edel fears that the most she can do is make it kneel. fearing she won't have line of sight of it. Seeing as the clone has detected them, the three are forced to engage the clone, swiftly erecting barriers to prevent the clone from bursting their defenses or slipping through. Barely able to buy Edel some time, Edel manages to lock eyes with the clone, ordering it to kneel, but sadly the clone manages to puncture Edel's heart. Reporting that the clones indeed have no minds, Edel instructs the others to flee, choosing to smash her own bottle. Buying enough time for Blay and Dunst to flee, we cut back to Frieren, who states that it's best to assume clones don't have minds to be hypnotized. Following Werble and his party, they both seem to be even with their clone counterparts, but Werble knows how they can win. As air bombards Werble and Scharf's clones, Werble collapses the roof on the air clone lingering above. At the same time, Fern says she knows how they can defeat Frieren's clone, impressing Frieren as she wants Fern to kill her clone. Confirming their plan, the gang agree to have Edel hypnotize Frieren. But before they can continue, they spot an injured Dunst stumbling onto their meeting. Dunst reports that Edel had to drop out. As for Blay, he has purposely stayed back to halt Sense's clone, allowing Dunst to make it here. As Method patches up Dunst's wounds, Dunst reveals that the clones indeed don't have minds, meaning the gang will have to tackle the clone head-on. Richter speaks up, suggesting that the clones may have a unique weakness, but Sense simply remains quiet, unable to help the examinees. Appearing at that moment, Lawine reveals that the clones are being controlled by the mythical Spiegel, information she obtained from her brother, who had also explored the dungeon. Richter scolds Lawine for keeping the information to herself, but Lawine fires back, stating that Richter would also throw away his allies if it meant he were the last one standing. Continuing on, Lawine mentions how the Spiegel is hidden away behind the doors guarded by Frieren's clone, a creature that has no way of attacking or defending, solely relying on the clones. Sadly, Dinkin had already detected a high-tier sealing spell on the door guarding the Spiegel, a spell Frieren knows her clone must have cast, as it binds a mage's life to the seal, meaning the seal can only be broken when the mage is defeated. Seeing as they have to take down Frieren's clone, Lawine suggests that they all hurry up, since her brother found that the clones eventually gather on the bottom floor, cornering and slaying all who enter the dungeon. Seeing as clones will imitate the behavior of the originals, Fern asks Frieren to stand facing a nearby wall, but as Fern fires off a beam at Frieren, Dinkin suddenly realizes what Frieren's fatal flaw is as Frieren blocks Fern's projectile. Dinkin states that when Frieren casts a spell, she briefly stops sensing mana around herself, something only beginner mages struggle with. Embarrassed, Frieren states that she's never been able to overcome such a hurdle, prompting everyone to begin planning out a strategy. Seeing Frieren so happy, Fern learns that Frieren treasures the time her hero party would plan their attacks before each boss raid, with everyone coming up with the best plan possible. Everyone questions whether having Frieren and Fern take on Frieren's clone alone is the best, but Frieren reassures everyone that two should be more than enough, especially since the others need to hold off the other clones beginning to head down towards their level. Just like that, Frieren and Fern head in, alerting the clone to their positions. Immediately, Frieren and the clone float into the air, both attempting to predict each other's moves only for both to cast the same black lightning spell. Running for cover, Fern watches as Frieren evades her clone's attacks, both facing each other, using the bare minimum actions to incinerate a piece of falling debris. Knowing that Fern has concealed her presence, Frieren turns her full attention onto her clone, fearing just how powerful herself can be when unleashed. Flashing back, Fern asks if she should really be using the Zoltrak spell to attack the clone, but Frieren reminds Fern that even a basic Zoltrak attack can destroy even Frieren herself, advising Fern to give it her all when attacking the clone. Having found an opening, Fern heads out preparing to attack the clone, but flashing back once more, we see Ciri surprised that Frieren has visited her without Flam. Frieren points out she is simply delivering Flam's will, shocking Ciri as she didn't realize 50 years was long for humans. Reading Flam's will, Ciri reads that Flam had managed to convince the Emperor to allow humans to begin researching and using magic, a thing humans believed was taboo since magic was solely used by demons for evil. Flam had asked for Ciri to continue helping the humans develop magic to fight back against the demons, but Ciri is opposed to such a thing, shredding Flams will only to ask Frieren to leave. Ciri is disappointed herself, and Flam never came to an agreement on what was best for humanity. making Ciri wonder why she chose to train Flam to begin with. But Frieren reveals that Flam had already predicted Ciri would be opposed to her suggestions. Upon hearing that Flam had already achieved her dream, Ciri asks to go on a walk with Frieren, pointing out that Flam originally didn't care for humanity and their struggle against the demons. Ciri also begins berating Flam for having her favorite spell be one that creates a field of flowers. But regardless, Ciri is still impressed that Flam was able to become the one that introduced magic to humanity. Since human lives are shorter than elven lives, Ciri doesn't blame Flam for rushing things so much, especially since Ciri and Frieren are interested to see how much magic grows and develops in the coming years. At that moment, Frieren manages to evade her clone's fatal spell, allowing Fern to land a direct attack on the clone. As the smoke clears, the clone appears unfazed, replying by conjuring a black hole, beginning to suck in everything around it, but Frieren swiftly dispatches the black hole. Using the surrounding rubble, Frieren summons a massive golem, protecting it from the clone's black lightning, watching as the clone charges up another spell. At that moment, Fern attempts to land another Zoltrak, but the clone manages to detect and block the spell, continuing its incantation. With Frieren knowing that they'll tire out the clone, we cut outside where Lewine and Can's clone is beginning to zone in on Dinkin and their party, but Lewine and Richter choose to confront them before it gets hectic. Dinkin had asked for everyone to reveal their weaknesses, asking Lewine and Richter to face Lewine and Can's clone, Dunst and Kin to face Richter's clone, and Laufen to face Method's clone. Flashing back, Method does point out how she is unable to detect Sense's clone along with Fern and Dinkin's clone, fearing that they'll be the deciding factor on whether Fern and Frieren can defeat Frieren's clone. When the gang call out how unfair it is for Sense's clone to be a factor, Sense points out that mages should be able to overcome such a hurdle, cutting back to Lewine and Richter, who managed to slay Lewine and Can's clone. Preparing to head back, Lewine is suddenly impaled, prompting Richter to create an earth wall, but sadly Richter is impaled as well. With no other choice, both mages break their bottles, right as Dinkin arrives, sad to see he wasn't able to help. Even with Sense's clone facing away, Dinkin admits that he alone will stand no chance against such a monster. Seeing as he must by the other's time, Dinkin prepares to distract the clone, but out of nowhere Ubble and Land ask if Dinkin needs some help. When Dinkin attempts to explain the situation, Ubble simply asks if Dinkin needs the clone defeated, declaring that herself alone can defeat the clone, but Land doesn't believe Ubble. Ubble reveals that her cutting attack can slash anything she imagines, turning the corner only to confirm that her binding spell doesn't work on Sense's clone since most of the clone's hair is still hidden. With the clone charging at Ubble, Ubble activates her slashing attack, but at the same time Sense detects that Ubble is currently fighting her clone, already predicting who will win. Flashing back 2 years, Sense recounts the time when she oversaw another first-class mage exam, watching as the genius defense mage Berg set up the second test. Berg had instructed the examinees to make him move, and if they did he would pass them, but with his cloaks layered with defense magic, all mages failed to leave a scratch on Berg. That was until Ubble stepped up, instantly splitting Berg in half, but since taking another's life was prohibited, Ubble was ultimately disqualified. Sense eventually asked how Ubble was able to penetrate Berg's brilliant defense, but Ubble uses the analogy of cutting cloth like how her older sister did. Ubble mentions how she loved the sound scissors made as it tore apart clothing, and it was that imagination that ultimately allowed Ubble to cut through Berg's impenetrable defense. Sense admits that Ubble's twisted mind is what ultimately places Ubble above Sense herself, cutting back to the present where Ubble has finished up shredding the clone's hair, ultimately winning the duel. Following Method, she is seen healing Sharf, impressed to see Werble and his party has managed to defeat their clone counterparts, all impressed that Ubble managed to defeat Sense's clone. Werble agrees to help dispatch the remaining clones, asked by Method to go and hunt down Dinkin's clone. As for Fern's clone, Method states that she'll handle Fern's clone alone. Air wonders if Method will be okay, but Method reassures everyone that she's already tested out her binding magic on the real Fern. With Dinkin, Ubble, and Land heading elsewhere, Land is suddenly binded, impressed to see that Ubble's clone has been reconstructed, cutting across the dungeon as all the clones seems to have been respawned, forcing everyone to hold on until Frieren can dispatch her own clone. Back with Frieren, she flies to evade a molten burst of flame, but seeing as Fern is unable to find any openings, Frieren states that she must risk it all to win. Frieren had mentioned how her weakness alone won't be enough to take down the clone. Therefore, Frieren had instructed Fern to watch closely as Frieren will force the clone to leave themselves wide open. Unleashing a nuclear spell, both Frieren and her clone begin infusing various spells, both canceling each other's magic, but this forces the clone to enhance their magic further. Erecting a barrier, Frieren is forced to defend against such a devastating spell, ultimately watching as her clone shatters her barrier only to dash in close for the finishing blow. Right then, Fern incinerates one of the clone's arms, following up with another rally of attacks, disarming the clone entirely. Seeing as the clone no longer has a wand, Fern prepares to end the clone's life, but is suddenly blasted back, unable to sense the spell the clone just casted. Luckily, Frieren uses this opening to completely incinerate the clone, praising Fern as Frieren had to use one of her rare spells during the battle. Finally entering the Spiegel's room, Frieren dispatches its core, destroying all of the clones in the process. Having entered the treasure room of the dungeon, Sense congratulates everyone for completing the second test, all wondering where Frieren and Fern are, only to spot Frieren once again stuck in the jaws of a mimic. The next day, we follow Stark once again meditating alongside the strange man, surprised to see Fern joining him, but she seems pissed. Stark learns that Fern had another argument with Frieren, mad that Frieren suggested buying new staff instead of repairing her broken one, but Stark asks that the girls not fight before their third and final test. Stark knows that Frieren meant no harm by those suggestions, but Fern reminds Stark that Hyder gifted her the staff and has used only that staff ever since. Cutting to Ken, who seems to be cheering Lewine up for dropping out of the exam, receiving a head pat from Ken as Lewine has to wait another 3 years until the next first-class mage exam. As the girls run into Frieren with a bag, we cut to Richter, annoyed that Denkin and Laufen are hanging around in his shop. Richter admits that he is disappointed to have not passed the second test, blaming himself for being too weak, but Denkin corrects him, stating that Richter was simply unlucky. When Richter begins to insult Denkin simply brushes off the insults, continuing to search and gather for items, revealing that Richter reminds Denkin of himself. Denkin asks that Richter not be discouraged, guaranteeing Richter will be far stronger in 3 years' time. As Denkin and Laufen leave, Richter closes his eyes for a second, but suddenly spots Frieren entering his shop. Annoyed to see a familiar face, Richter hears that Frieren needs an item to be repaired, confused to see a sack of wood pieces. Seeing as he's having a horrible day, Richter refuses to accept Frieren's task, but upon hearing Frieren doubt his skills, Richter changes his mind. Enchanting the broken pieces, Richter is impressed at how well kept the wood pieces are, cutting to later that night where Stark is feeding Fern snacks to lighten her mood. Heading back, Stark reminds Fern that Frieren isn't the most observant at times, something Fern already knows. Passing by Richter's store, Fern greets Richter, surprised to hear that Frieren was in his store earlier. Rushing home, Fern is shocked to see her staff repaired, remembering back when Hyder had told Fern that Frieren isn't the best at understanding emotions, but Frieren will do her best to make things right. With the third test day arriving, the participants wait outside a room, all while Ciri scolds Sense for allowing 12 mages to pass onto the third exam. Ciri points out how Frieren basically carried undeserving mages through the second exam. Therefore, Ciri fears that the third exam will get some of them killed. Ciri declares that she'll personally proctor the third exam, asking Lernan if he objects, but Lernan states that Ciri is the best person to evaluate Frieren's skills, especially since Ciri is the only person that has equal mana to Frieren. Amused, Ciri asks if Falsh also noticed Frieren suppressing her mana, but Falsh states he couldn't tell since Frieren was still emitting normal mana fluctuations all mages give off. Ciri reveals that it takes hundreds of years to master suppressing one's mana, and it takes even more skill to be able to realize someone is suppressing their own mana, something most demons aren't able to do. The only person that could sense that Frieren was concealing her mana was the Demon King himself. That and Lernan, something Lernan brushes off as mere luck. Seeing as Lernan hasn't changed 50 years ago, from when he was first awarded first-class mage, Ciri finds it disappointing that Lernan won't get to blossom further as a mage, limited by his human body. As Ciri leaves, Ciri reveals that she too has also been suppressing her mana, disappointed to see that Lernan wasn't able to pick up that she has a greater mana pool than Frieren herself. Starting the final exam, Falsh states that Siri will talk to examinees one at a time, personally judging whether they pass or not. First up is Can, entering into a massive glass room, only to stiffen up as she stands before Siri. Without another word, Siri fails Can, having sensed that Can stiffened up as she approached Siri. Following up, Siri fails Dunst, Laufen, Scharf, and Air, stopping on Frieren only to ask what Frieren's favorite spell is. When Frieren says it's a spell to create a field of flowers, Siri insults Frieren for liking Flam's useless spell, but as Frieren turns to leave, Siri wonders how Frieren defeated the Demon King with such an attitude. Stopping, Frieren corrects Siri, as it was ultimately the hero party as a whole that defeated the Demon King, something Frieren regards as complete luck to have formed such a team. Flashing back, Frieren had once asked why Himmel chose her to be the mage of their party, but Himmel recounts a time when his younger self was lost in a forest. It was then where Frieren appeared, pointing Himmel in the direction of his village. But seeing as Himmel was scared, Frieren conjured a field of flowers to put Himmel at ease. Frieren states that Flam's favorite spell was also the spell that ultimately convinced Himmel to have Frieren join their party, leading to the defeat of the Demon King himself. Frieren reveals that she knows Siri plans on failing Fern as well, but Frieren reminds Siri that the era of human mages has arrived. At first glance, Siri is disappointed to see Fern is frozen stiff by her suppressed mana output, but suddenly realizing something, Siri asks what Fern sees. Hearing that Fern is able to see Siri's true mana output, Siri smiles, asking Fern to be her student, but Fern refuses. Siri promises to make Fern the greatest mage to ever live, but being instructed by Frieren to answer honestly, Fern states that she will forever be Frieren's student only. Disappointed, Siri accepts Fern's answer, passing Fern regardless as to not halt her development into a great mage. Next up is Denkin, an imperial mage the best of his kind in the Northern Land, someone Siri wishes she had trained when Denkin was younger. Siri asks if Denkin had thought of how he would defeat Siri, but hearing Denkin admit that he thought of it, Siri passes Denkin, happy to see Denkin still has the drive to fight. When Yubel enters the room, Siri instantly passes Yubel, prompting Yubel to leave without another word. After Yubel is Land, pissing Siri off as she asks Land to not joke around, but Land states that he and his clone are in the room as to not be disqualified. Calling Land's bluff, Siri reveals that she knows Land's real body is back in his hometown, something Yubel never figured out. Satisfied, Siri passes Land, calling for Werbel next, someone Siri knows is the captain of the Northern Magic Corps. Siri knows that Werbel had already analyzed Siri to be the victor if they ever fought, asking Werbel for his favorite spell. Werbel states that magic is used to kill, therefore he doesn't have any favorites, prompting Siri to pass him. Finally, Siri asks what Method is thinking, weirded to hear Method adores Siri, but still passes Method regardless. Wrapping up the exam, Siri apologizes for doubting Sense, admitting that there is quite some exceptional talent this year. As everybody heads out, Fern tells Frieren the good news, receiving a head pat for the great work, but before the girls leave, Denkin manages to thank Frieren since he'll get to visit a close one's grave thanks to his new mage status. The next morning, Stark accompanies Fern when picking out some snacks, running into Laufen and Denkin, all sitting down for a meal. Denkin encourages everyone to dig in, leading Stark to ask who the old man is. Upon hearing that Denkin is a noble, Stark stiffens up, but Denkin reassures everyone that he's very easygoing. Stark and Fern wonder why Denkin is spending his money on them, but Denkin reveals that he doesn't have children to spend the money on, and his wife passed away when he was in his mid-20s. Denkin adds that his wife was always sick, having belonged to a noble family that was overthrown in the north. Sadly, before Denkin rose to power, his wife had passed. Ironic since now Denkin has all the power in the world. Denkin tells Fern to continue loving magic, especially since Denkin himself only ever considered magic as a tool, but it was thanks to Frieren and the hero party that ultimately ignited Denkin's love for magic. Elsewhere, we see Frieren fiending over the new grimoire she acquired, suddenly stopping as she spots an old woman has spilled her fruits everywhere. Surprisingly, Werbel offers to help the old lady, sitting down with Frieren disappointed to see that Frieren didn't help out. Frieren brings up the fact that Werbel tried to slay Fern and her party during the first exam, but Werble says he was simply issuing small threats to get his point across. Werble tells Frieren that he isn't a bad guy, having wanted the first-class title to become stronger and slay more demons. But Frieren wonders what is driving Werble to do such a thing. Werble mentions how Himmel was regarded as a true hero in his village, hearing countless stories about Himmel's adventures. But Werble found it weird why the village elders only ever recounted tales regarding their village or small jobs Himmel did. It wasn't until Himmel passed that Werble understood, as his village was soon after attacked by demons, realizing that although Himmel has a legacy, Werble himself should think about and forge his own future. That way he doesn't have to rely on others. Before leaving, Werble asks that Frieren treasure every moment she can, making Frieren remember a mundane job Himmel had his party complete. When Eisen had questioned the reason for completing such a mundane job, Himmel stated that he will help anyone in need, regardless of the task, something Frieren is grateful others like Werble are starting to adopt. That evening, Fern says she's allowed to bring guests when she is awarded her first-class title, but Frieren seems to be acting strange. Upon arriving at the association, the receptionist reveals that Frieren is forbidden from entering any magic branch for the next 1,000 years. But Frieren had anticipated this, having insulted Ciri recently. As Stark and Frieren wait outside, Frieren notes how there are fewer than 50 first-class mages, and now Fern is one of the greats, believing Fern will surpass even Frieren's legacy. Out of nowhere, Lernan appears, greeting Frieren as one of Ciri's students. When Lernan apologizes for Ciri kicking Frieren out, Frieren says it's okay, instead impressed that Lernan is able to see past Frieren's mana suppression. Frieren is sad to see such a skilled fighter like Lernan live in such a peaceful era, something Lernan also agrees is unfortunate, as he's jealous of the legacy Ciri's first student, Flam, left behind. At that moment, Lernan fires several balls of magic at Frieren, breaching her barriers only to land a strike on Frieren's right shoulder. Sadly, Frieren refuses to fight, reassuring Lernan that Ciri treasures all of her students. Flashing back, before Frieren had left the testing room, she had pointed out that the room Ciri is in was filled with flowers created by Flam's favorite spell. Confused, Ciri admits that although Flam was a failure who never surpassed Ciri herself, Ciri still remembered the personality and favorite spells of all of her students, not regretting the time spent with any of them. Frieren points out how childish Ciri can be, unable to tell her students how she truly feels, something Lernan admits is true for himself as well. With Fern meeting back up with Frieren and Stark, they all continue their journey the next day, finally departing from Oberst. But Frieren is curious as to what spell Fern had asked for. Standing tall and proud, Fern reveals that she asked for a spell that cold clean and dried dirty clothes, something Frieren agrees was the best spell Fern could have chosen. But Ciri definitely expected more from Fern. Passing by the town's bridge, Frieren and the gang run into Lewine and Can, happy to hear the girls are still motivated to take the exam in 3 years' time. With a quick goodbye, the gang departs, but Fern wonders why they always have quick goodbyes. Flashing back, the hero party had just completed a job, swiftly leaving after exchanging goodbyes, but Frieren wonders why they do such a thing. The season ends with Himmel explaining that since they've been through so much together, it would be awkward if they ran into each other again in the future, sure that their paths will cross again in the future. Check out one of our other videos on the screen or in the info card above. Subscribe, like, and comment.